You're late.
I know I am.
It's Monday morning at Rust Bros.
Shop manager is supposed to be here before the employees. When are you going to grace us with your presence?
I'm about 3 minutes away from you.
Goodbye.
Not done. Bye.
Mike's new shop manager is late for work.
If you want to be a manager or a foreman, in my books, you got to lead by example. Avery's an employee as well. He's just an employee with a title. Avery, you're late.
For what?
You're supposed to set an example. You're getting paid, show up on time.
Who am I setting an example to? You? There's nobody else here.
Tony's here.
Tony's always here.
Tony lives here.
Tony lives here.
Okay, so what we're going to do, Abe, the client's on his way in to check this out.
Today, Mike has to deliver some bad news to an important client.
Up and away!
The owner of a problematic 1966 Pontiac Parisienne.
He's gonna take a gander at his repaired frame.
He said it was good, but I'm sure he didn't crawl under it. He was like us. I took his word, he took their word.
Well, here she is.
Geez, you told me it was in good shape. Half of it's missing.
2 weeks ago, Mike took on the challenge of restoring the Parisienne.
My band is about to release our second record, and I need this car done in time for the album release.
Despite a tight deadline.
Frame's good?
Yep, frame's good. It's had a repair in the left rear where they always go.
Yep.
Somebody's idea fixed and his idea fixed are two different things.
But the car's frame is more rust than metal, and they don't have time to fix it.
It's a cool car, but there is a shitload of work to bring it back to what Clint wants. But on the positive note, I think we've got a good frame down out of one of my 65 Impalas.
Mike,
But,
you can't be giving shit away, Mike.
well, the guy's spending a lot of money. I don't have to gouge him.
You got to stop absorbing everybody's problems.
I'm not
You know
gonna
what it's gonna
absorb
cost us? Who's gonna pay for this? We're gonna have to go out there. We're gonna have to disassemble
I
it.
know.
We're gonna have to get it taken apart, Mike.
I will discuss this with Clint.
The cost has to be passed on. I am the shop manager. I take it seriously. Mike has a perfectly viable business here, but he just won't listen to anybody how to run it.
What the hell is going on with my car?
Clint, there's your frame. There's your repair area covered with a 1/4 inch of mud.
I always thought they went back here in the rear wheel well area, and I
They go from here to here.
It's done. It and a piece of aluminum foil have a lot in common.
I don't think that was my guy.
I wouldn't trust any of it.
Okay, somebody's done some really poor work. I didn't realize it was as bad as it was.
We do have a solution. I have 265 Impalas, which is the same frame as this.
Yep.
We think they're solid.
Okay.
Clint's a cool guy. Basically, we're both long-haired freaks, and we both like cars. We've got to meet this deadline.
Look at all this wonderful stuff. You think you're back at home.
Oh, there's one. They're having a nap up there. There's a whole family of them.
Where?
What's
On
this
top
right
of
here?
that car. Get off that car. Okay, let's find a frame. Oh, here we go. 65 big block SS. What Pontiac in Canada did, they're full-size cars. They were built on American Chevrolet frames. So the frames are the same for Parisiennes as they are for the Impalas. Let me just take a good look. The rails look mint.
I would beg to differ on this left rear section. Looks a little tow truck damage or something.
Yeah, it's just bent, though.
What do you figure that frame's worth to you?
By the time we drag it up, I pay my guys to do it. We look at, we check it out. I mean,
Okay,
I'm
well-
thinking $1,000.
I just don't have the finances right now. The way I see it, you got a lot of projects on the go. If you
Yep.
get anything that needs a small, reliable V8, I'll trade you for it.
Low mileage one.
Oh, slow down a little bit.
That just might cover the little bit of the sound blasting and the paint of the chassis and shit.
Sure, sure.
We need money for the shop, not a bunch more junk.
Something like that?
We can have a train full of parts coming up here, and
Hey, we shake the man's hand.
Deal.
Yeah, okay. I told him I'd buck up a frame, and he's gonna trade me a small block motor, so I think it's a pretty fair swap.
We're gonna take the body off of this, get the frame.
The crew gets to work pulling the Impala's frame, but the swap will put the build behind schedule.
Take it down.
There. He's gonna have a really good, proper frame for his build. Hopefully it doesn't cost me too much or take too much time. We've got a month to try and get it done for his album debut.
next morning,
Sarah,
Yes.
where's Boyd at? Where is Cassidy at?
Avery has a plan to help get Mike's costs under control.
Come over here for a second, please.
I'm busy.
Think of it as a paid break. We're trying to get a little bit more efficient this year. Okay, it's just not you that's getting singled out. I'm having a talk with everybody because we're all bad at it.
Yeah.
You know what? There's absolutely no structure in this shop. Everybody's been let to do their own thing for so long that they just got bad work habits, some of them. It ends today.
You know, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 5 minutes there. At the end of the day, 10 minutes, it adds up to an hour a day. Your work is absolutely incredibly good. Your focus is out there, out there.
You know, I think everybody had a pretty good reaction to what I had to say.
I try not to talk to him on a daily basis.
Well-
That's not really the problem.
Again, that's not the point.
There was one exception, Cassidy.
What I'm saying, I guess, is keep yourself busy. Okay?
I get it. I've been a teenager before.
The other problem is being punctual and on time. Okay? And if this is the nice talk the first go around, the next time, I won't be as nice.
I would like to see Cassidy step up to the plate. She's got it in her to do it.
All right.
Keep yourself busy.
Well, it's doing.
Avery isn't finished yet. He has other ideas for improving things around the shop.
There's a pile of gravel here. It's been there for a week. I'm gonna spread it. I'm gonna level everything off in the front of here. Gonna have a nice ramp going into the shop.
Like, what the This isn't what that gravel was for. Why didn't you ask?
Get some more gravel, Mike.
No, we had a full load. Avery's a shop manager. He shouldn't be out spreading my gravel where I don't want it spread. But Avery would rather play than work sometimes. Next time, before you spread my $400 worth of gravel, ask me where I want it. Holy.
I don't know what he's getting pissed off about. Every time we go to put a car in here, you gotta put 5 boards on it. So, order more gravel. I scuffed the building. I knew I shouldn't have got this close to this building. These controls I do not like in this machine. Mike!
What?
Come here.
No, I'm busy.
I got some good news and I got some bad news.
What? Holy.
I think I can straighten it out, though. I'm pretty sure I hit it. I'm not sure. With
Well,
the
no,
controls,
somebody else hit it down here with a.
well, take responsibility for it. I hit it, but I'll straighten the thing back
No,
out.
you can buy a whole new piece.
Oh, yeah, along with that dent over there and the other dent.
Well, you probably did them all. Hey, Avery, hide that ass. You should at least camouflage that thing, Avery.
I bought a belt.
Everybody around here is going to be suing us for trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder.
You're a smart ass.
A few hours later,
Up at the back. Hang on. Okay, wait a sec.
Avery and Mike are removing the rusty front cowl on the 66 Parisienne.
There's a bracket right there that's spot welded on. Take the grinder and get in there. You know what, Mike, I like about you so much? It's how safety-orientated you are.
That didn't help nothing.
Yeah, it did. Give me that grinder.
No.
Mike. It's a very little cut that has to be done. I see right where it is. Just give me that grinder. There.
Okay.
Ready?
Okay.
That there piece almost should be taken out of the other car. Almost.
That's what I was thinking. We found some rust issues with Clint's car. There were just rust coming through in some weird places. Well, I'd actually like to go and look at the other cars and then just go pull it out. Okay, so let's get this thing unrolled. That'll work. Going back.
To help with the rust repair, Mike's hauled up one of his own Parisiennes.
We went down in my field and we found a car to cut parts out of to weld into Clint's. Okay, let's get at it. Let's get this thing cleaned out and gutted, and then we'll see what we got. Ah, just what I need, an iron.
Here, a car you could afford.
There we go. There was something valuable in there, hey, Tony?
Paid for itself already.
God, this is disgusting. Finish stripping out all the carpet and let's look at everything. I don't know, it's looking not too bad. It's way solider than the other one. Basically, all we'd have to patch, Tony, so far is this. This we can just sandblast, weld up a couple pinholes. I'm thinking, I mean, this is just a way more solid shell, and the client's gonna end up with a better product,
No,
but
that's true.
this parts car is way better than Clint's car. We could take the parts car and make it his car. If it's only these back panels here that are rusty, and all we gotta do is change the trunk pan, is that not way less work?
Yeah. Mike wants to start over from scratch and restore this Parisienne for Clint instead.
But his kid drove that car to ground. I mean, that car has sentimental value.
Hello.
Clint,
Hey, what's going on?
we drug the parts car up out of the field, and it's in better shape than your car.
Okay.
That's the moral dilemma. I mean, if you're, does it have to be that shell, or can we take all your parts and put it on a better shell? And my body guys figures we'd save a week.
Do it.
Okay.
Man, it'll still have the heart and soul of my car.
Okay, thanks, Clint.
All right, man. Do it.
Okay,
Thanks
chum.
a lot.
Okay, no, thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, there we go. Tony, it's a go. You know what they say, don't switch horses in midstream? Well, the horse we were riding was losing steam. We're way behind. Let's get all the rust cut out of it before we make a mess inside.
Dad!
Connor,
What the hell is this?
what does it look like?
Looks like another Parisienne.
Yeah,
Why?
because we drug this one up to cut parts out of it, and it's better than the one we're working on. So just like that Keanu Reeves movie, The Replacements, well, we're replacing his car with this one.
So we're gonna build this one for him.
Yes,
So, are you selling him this car?
I'm giving him a good deal on it, yeah.
Good deal or giving him?
And we don't have to change
Good
these.
deal or giving him?
We'll work it out in the end. I think Clint's a pretty fair guy.
So you're saying he brought us a car to build on a frame, and we're literally using nothing.
One door.
One door.
Need to come up a little bit higher, bro, but
This one? That's pretty high.
no, just take it, bring it up.
I
like
know,
this.
it's going to just...
You can always Google it. You just compress them, yeah. As long as these are opposite, you can't.
Actually.
Avery's getting some help from part-time mechanic Craig with a dangerous job.
Isn't that scary?
It's nothing to with.
Installing high-tension springs on the Parisienne suspension.
These springs got to be compressed up to 3 to 4 inches. There's a lot of spring pressure on there. Get the jack out. It's like a bomb. If this thing goes off, it will do some damage. One needs to take extreme caution.
Bend it down a little bit. A little more.
Hey, you gotta push it.
A little more. There.
Lift it up.
We need some weight.
Set on that and see if it comes down. I don't.
Avery needs to compress the spring an inch more to get it to fit.
Look at that. Hang on. Why is it not going anywhere? Mike!
What?
Come here for a minute. Stand right on the end. With more weight on the end. Just be careful.
Hang on. Oh, yeah, just be careful. I see disaster happen. The spring comes out, it can kill you. That's why coil springs are dangerous. What could possibly go wrong?
It's Avery's face, not
Well,
ours.
I know.
It's not that big a deal. I know what I'm doing.
Push on it some more.
Oh, Jesus Christ, Dave.
Mike's scared because he's never done one before.
Okay.
Tighten it right up.
I don't fall
Oh, gee, Dave.
Why don't you take a deep breath?
What are you guys doing?
Hanging out.
Hanging out.
It's like a big bro moment over there.
We're bonding.
Hey, get off there. You see Craig whining?
Yes. He doesn't want to die either. You know what they say, Abe? He who runs away lives to run away another day. Clint.
Hey guys, how's it going?
A few hours later, Mike has a surprise visitor.
What's in the trailer?
A nice, beautiful car that needs to be finished.
El Pontiac.
Was that a GTO?
67.
The GTO's iconic. They're simple, they're basic, they were meant to
I'd like to have it ready for my daughter's graduation, which is in about 5 to 6 weeks, I think it is. She loves cars. She only gets to graduate once, and I want it to be something that both of us will never forget.
What do you want to do? Like, just have us give you a kind of ballpark
Give me
figure?
a ballpark, you know, what
Okay,
you guys would...
There's no motor in it?
No motor.
Well, we can just push it out. Okay, let's
Okay,
move.
one winder.
We're going out straight, eh?
Yep, it's gonna be close.
No dents, no scratches.
Okay, crank her hard, Dave. Crank her hard, crank her hard, crank her hard.
That's it, it should roll off.
We are, whoa, whoa. A little more. It's good. It's good, Dave. Okay, we're clear, we're free. Okay, so Dave, go right around and push her in backwards. Yeah, crank, 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 crank. There we go, that wasn't that bad. Okay, well, let's take a good look at this thing now. So the mud work's been done and there's just like one coat on it or what?
Yeah.
I'm assuming this was just loosened off. That's why this gap is so bad. And you got the hood with the little scoop?
Oh, of course.
Of course you do.
Of course, yeah.
Are you going carburetor or fuel injection?
I'm still on the fence about that. I think I'd like to switch it to fuel injection.
He wants the upgrade, brand new fuel injection. But I like old stuff. Old stuff, people built to last. I prefer a carb. This sure sound good. New stuff is just junk. Planned obsolescence.
I don't know. I think that's the way to go now. Get rid of the carbs.
He's coming at it from a different angle than me.
So what do you think?
I think it's a great car.
I think it's a great car, and if you got all the parts, I mean, I can't see spending much more than 30K finishing this.
Yeah.
But Rust Bros isn't the end of the road for the GTO. Clint's off to get a second quote from Mike's friend and competitor.
Clint, what are you up to today?
I came to show you my beautiful car that needs to be finished.
Come on.
In Rust Valley, J.F. Lanier is the high priest of the high end. His restorations have won him top honors across the continent.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Last summer, JF came to Mike's rescue when his restoration of a 68 Chevelle went sideways. Today, he's giving a competing quote on the GTO.
Well, me and Mike went over it, and I mean, we came to a price where I'm comfortable with.
Mike, and bless his soul, but he's a bit rough around the edges. Clint is a little too fussy for them. We're gonna kick some ass.
I know you're more expensive than that.
They're doing cars for the average guy to afford.
That's right.
We'll do the best we can to make it really pretty and get it done on time.
It's important to me and to my daughter. That's why it's here.
Okay.
JF's won the job at a much higher price than Mike's.
JF's given me a number of between 40 and 50 to finish a car, and it's a lot of money, but I know that's what it costs to do a project like this.
Wait a sec. Mike didn't get his greasy paws all over this, did he?
Oh, you know he did.
Oh, no.
Back at Rust Bros, the other Clint is stopping by with a special delivery.
What'd you bring us, Clint?
Christmas presents.
Oh, look at that, an artifact. Hey. You know the good thing about this artifact, Mike? It's not an ancient one.
No.
A modern 6.2-liter LS motor.
This actually ran.
Okay.
We did leave it as complete as we possibly could.
It looks like it's all there.
I like them. If there's anything that Clint is doing right, it is putting this LS in this car. You know what? He'll be into the 21st century. Unlike Mike, he's still trying to carve wheels out of stone for sakes.
So Merry Christmas to the project.
Yeah.
What else we got in here? Ooh, I see shiny things. Oh, look, it's even in a Tremec box.
That's nice.
Let's all gather around and pray to the God of the six-speed.
That's the stuff that Clint deals with, modern engines. I've never played with anything past about 1972.
The only thing that's needed is somebody to put it all together.
So just looking at this LS is giving me the heaves. Okay, let's get that engine out.
Yeah, I can do that.
If it doesn't work, I'll just go in and pay it. That one worked. Thank you. Mike,
Yes.
I found a bunch of instruction manuals for that T56.
Mike and Avery are about to tackle the install of Clint's brand new 6-speed transmission in the Parisienne.
I've never done one of these. We just want to make sure when we put it in, we do it right the first time.
And I've got another one here that's like 20 pages long, so I haven't printed it yet.
What's it for? Oh, look.
It's for the hydraulic.
Before installing transmission in car, you must check the hydraulic bearing cushion measurement. Damage will occur if measurement is incorrect in giant big black letters.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's important, that
The
part.
3 exclamation marks.
Yeah.
I give it away.
Maybe we should print that one off, too. How simple is this tranny if there's the instructions to put it in? Like, unbelievable. Avery, there's all the instructions for installing the tranny in the clutch.
I don't want to read it.
Well, then
Just
how
give
you...
it to me. There's only certain parts that you need to worry about.
Oh, the part where it says damage will occur if measurement is incorrect. Have you ever done this transmission?
It's a transmission.
That's a no. That's a
It
no.
doesn't really matter.
It does matter. It's $6,000, $7,000. This isn't my money.
It's really not a big deal.
It's all a big deal if it's done
It's
wrong.
critical how you comb your hair, too, that you don't shove the comb in your eye. That's very critical.
I didn't spend the $6 grand on the tranny. The client did, and I don't want to be the one that screws it up. You're not touching it. Go away.
Whatever, I could care less.
I know you can't. If I'm not sure, I will ask someone that knows better than me. Now, Brandon, when we're just like we trial fit the transmission.
Isn't it lunchtime yet?
Down the valley,
Oh, that's nice.
JF's working on the GTO job he scooped for Mike.
This car's super important to Clint because it's for his baby girl. He can't even afford to lose a day.
Look at all these nice little shiny goodies, eh? What are you doing now there, Chief?
Following the instructions. Yeah. Eh? How about that trick? That's a good one. Starts with 4 studs.
They're installing aftermarket chrome on the GTO's big block Chevy engine.
When you open that hood, it's going to make it pop. You got a wrench?
Right? Now, right. That is beautiful. Totally awesome. Yes. Think you could have found a bigger motor to put in this thing?
How you doing, Matt?
Hey.
Here, why don't we drag this one
Let's
out?
drag
Dave?
this sucker out.
This is the first time that we've ever seen one of these. I mean, I got top loaders and 833s and Muncie's up my yin-yang, but
You may never have seen one, Mike, but I've dealt with a few transmissions.
talking to
Who
Tremec.
cares? It's a transmission.
Back at Rust Bros,
See what I mean? That's why you're here,
Not a
Brent.
big deal.
Nothing's a big deal to Avery until we...
Mike has never fixed nothing a day in his life, so he's a little bit sketchy about it.
Mike's called in Brent for backup with the Parisienne's new 6-speed transmission.
I don't know. How do you usually set it
Your
up?
hand's touching my hand.
I know.
Realize that.
Don't get excited on me.
Mike thinks I'm an idiot. He needs to pay attention. I do know what I'm talking about sometimes. I'll prove him wrong.
Look at that.
Do we know what the torque spec is? Do we need a torque wrench?
So might have to look. I'm not sure.
Torque them or not.
That's why they have torque specs, Avery.
Mike's creating a mountain out of a molehill.
Mike, if you tighten enough nuts and bolts up, you can tell when the is tight and when it's to yield, okay?
I don't like to guess, but Avery's a by guess or by golly kind of guy.
He knows nothing about what we're doing. He just wants a confrontation.
If I ever become a counselor or something, I know you guys are going to be some clients of mine. Lots of work there.
Yeah.
With the clutch and bell housing in place, they are now ready to mount the transmission.
One, we want it to work. Two, we don't want it wearing out prematurely. So, I mean, these instructions are critical. Hey, Brent, what's your input on this situation?
So this is where Don't look at the instructions anymore. This is the most critical part, is this measurement. We want 150 to 200 thou clearance on this bearing.
Oh, I see what we're doing. Okay, I get it now. The light just went on, Brent. Basically, you take this distance, subtract it from that distance, because this is gonna both up flush.
4.263, 3.235.
Okay, yeah. 85 thou.
Okay, 4 shims.
4
shims.
You're happy?
Yeah.
I'm happy. Let's put the thing together. Can you grab one side?
Let me go down my side.
Hang on. There we go.
Well, there we go, guys.
Is it done?
Done like dinner.
Thanks, Brent.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Now that we've done one, now I get it. It isn't that complicated once you've seen it done. But what do I know? I own the body shop. Avery's the expert.
You guys have any questions, you can call me anytime.
I got a couple questions.
Yeah?
Why is the sky blue?
Can I help
What
you with
comes
those?
first, the egg or the chicken?
The next morning,
Hey, Cassidy, where is she?
I have no idea. I haven't seen her today.
Cassidy is late.
I spent at least 5 minutes telling her how I like the mask. I said it's got to be tight.
And Boyd isn't happy with her work.
And she masked the windows, and I had to just redo them.
She won't listen to anybody. That's the problem. And then when I have a talk with her and try to be nice to her, she just brushes me off like that.
You have to tone it down a little bit.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, good.
Cassidy, it's 8:08. How come you're putting your boots on now?
You know, it's important to have people working at their best. Everybody has it in them. The problem is how to get it out of them.
Hey, Cassidy,
What? I'm busy working.
come here, please. Can I have a talk with you? Try to clear the air here a little bit.
She's an employee. She's here to work. If you don't work, you're gonna get some criticism.
It seems like I'm coming down on you a little bit. It may come across that I'm being a bit of a dickhead, which I probably am. You need to get some good work habits.
Really, because the last job I just came from, they begged me to stay because they love my work. You want to sit here and bitch at me?
I do, Cassidy. I want you to keep busy, Cassidy. You need
I feel
to keep
like
busy.
this is your personal problem.
No, it is my personal problem. Cassidy, the attitude that you're pulling right now is the problem. Keep
know what?
yourself,
Until Mike
as
has
all
a
as I
problem.
ask one real simple thing. Keep yourself busy and follow the rules. Everybody
did.
needs to follow them. I had the same conversation with everybody, Cassidy. It's just not you singled out.
I grew up a little bit different. When we weren't working, we got a cuff alongside the back of the head.
Keep yourself busy.
That's what I'm doing, and you're stopping me from my work right now.
Cassidy,
I really don't know how to deal with her.
you're arguing with
Well,
me,
if
Cassidy?
you would talk
Cassidy,
to me nice, I would talk to you nice.
I'm not
You
worried
come
about
in
Cassidy.
in a raging
Cassidy,
rage.
I am talking to you nice. When I start talking to you poorly, you'll know, okay?
Dave, you hungry?
No, I just like food, Mike. Where have you been for the last 2 hours?
Getting something to soothe the savage beast.
At Rust Bros, Mike and Avery are sitting down to an executive lunch.
Wasabi.
Is that a little hot, Mike?
Oh, bringing a tear to my eye. Wasabi.
Mike, we need to get a few more guys working, I think, to try to pick things up and increase a little bit of efficiency. Our temperaments are rising because we're getting so far behind. And the happiness is leaving?
Yes,
It's not
the
happy
happiness is
anymore.
leaving, no.
The happiness, that's no good.
I know.
We're arguing and fighting, that's no good either.
No. If Avery's tired of yelling at people, it's because we have more work than bodies to do it. We're gonna go out and hire some more quality personnel. We can get 2 more body men here for a month or 2. That should catch us up, and we actually got enough work lined up. We'll keep them going. Avery's not polite. He's gonna have to coexist a little more. Just because he's shop manager doesn't mean he's God. There's a difference. Well, it's tasty.
You didn't buy nothing to drink?
No.
A few days later,
Come on.
Mike's still struggling with the bodywork on the replacement 66 Parisienne.
Got the one stripped right down, and we figured out which parts we can use off the original one. But we've got to get more people working. We've got some major deadlines approaching. John, what's shaking, bud? Said you'd make it. I didn't believe you. John's been doing body work for like 25 years. He's done a lot of work at JF's shop. If you are interested in coming on board, this is the first project.
Well, you know I love paint, but metalwork is my specialty, so.
Well, there's lots of everything here.
Yeah.
I don't care what you like, we got lots of it to do. I would be more than happy to have someone as skilled as John work at the shop. The higher quality of the talent, the higher quality of the cars. If you're interested, grab your coveralls and I'll put you to work.
Well, it's old and it's cool, so it's what I love. Let's get at it.
Okay, well, right on. You know, they say you throw enough money and labor at a problem and it goes away. Okay, thanks, John. Up and away.
Out in the yard.
Hey, Cassie.
Are you too busy to
I am
talk?
never too busy. We can have a chat.
I'm not sure what she wants. Maybe she's saying, hey, you know what? I'm gonna quit, and it's your fault. I hope that's not what it is.
I just wanted to, like, apologize how I acted.
Same for me. If I've done something to aggravate your life, because it's easier for everybody to get along.
Yeah. I have a little bit of, like, an attitude problem, and I know that. It's really hard for me to, like, take a step back and take whatever criticism he has. But the shop's not gonna work if everybody in there is fighting.
I've been in your position a couple times when I was younger, and you get 3 different bosses pulling you in 3 different directions. I can appreciate that. And sometimes I can be a little bit harsh myself. I'm trying to be nice.
It's pretty hard to come up to somebody that you had a bit of a problem with, you know, bury your pride a little bit and go, you know what, I was in the wrong, and you know what, I respect that.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Friction is not a good thing at work. It's just, it's all bad. Somebody happy works a lot better than somebody unhappy.
Hey, Lincoln. He's gotten so fat.
The dog can't even run. Seriously. They let him out of the truck. He died about from here to there. He's just like this, flat on his head. Just done.
Lincoln needs a diet like Mike.
Across the valley, Mike's new hire may have created some tension.
Jean-Francois, comment ça va? Ça va bien.
What's going on?
There's lots to be said, but somebody not giving me a courtesy phone call to say, hey, how come your guy applied for a job here? Because if one of your guys applies here, my first phone call will be to you. It'll be like, what's going on? If you're gonna hire one of my guys, just give me the courtesy, right?
No, okay. I didn't call him, JF.
Yeah.
Like, I just put an ad and he responded. I mean, I'm not trying to poach your guys.
No, I totally get that. And that's the quick conversation that we could have had about 5 days ago.
I'm not competing with JF. It's not like it's competition. I did not overtly try to hire John away from him. But I don't need no bad blood between you and me, JF.
Well, you know how it is. It goes both ways, right? I don't want some dumb shit like this to start some feud you and I don't need, right?
Yep. We having fun yet? Hey, JF.
Oh, if it isn't the brothers. What brings the brothers to town?
Didn't want you to have any hard feelings about John.
You know what? That kind of stuff just happens, and I'm not heartbroken, I'll tell you that.
Okay, it's all
There
good.
you go.
It's all good.
Yeah, other than that, it's just trying to get caught up on all these projects. This one's due in a couple days, and I'm struggling.
So this is for the GTO?
The GTO, yeah.
Yes.
So when you got your greasy fingers.
Yeah,
all
oh,
over
sorry.
last time.
Hey, I washed them under my pits before I came here. Okay, well, what do you need done?
As a gesture of peace, Mike and Avery offer to give JF a hand on the GTO.
I thought we were going for lunch.
Supper
You know what?
after.
I'll buy the pizza.
Maybe buy the pizza.
Come, I'll show you the car.
Ooh, back in black. I'd like to get along with everybody. You get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. Well, Clint, I can guarantee if you'd have brought this to our shop, JF would be up helping out.
Yeah. So we got about 2 weeks worth of work to do in
12 hours. Okay, let's get going. Get that jack stand in there. Let's go. Okay, that's good, Clint.
You know what they say, don't let fear and common sense slow you down.
I'm having a brain fart. 6-sided wrench. The Allen key. Okay. Ooh, there we go. What makes us human is our ability to laugh at other people's pain and suffering.
How about a chocolate chip cookie? I stole them from Ted.
It's also our ability to help people. It's a good feeling. She's come a long way, baby. It looks sick. Come on, guys.
Clint's daughter's graduation day has arrived.
I'm very excited to see the car. I haven't seen it since he first bought it, so I'm really excited to see what it looks like.
Here she is.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
The car does look fantastic. The color pops, the chrome. Front end is super cool. It looks like a GTO on steroids.
It's the black bumpers, right? To bring it into the sort of next generation of GTO. Hello, beautiful engine. Oh. What do you think of that?
Just amazing.
It's got the fuel injection, new tires and rims. The interior looks excellent. It's everything a muscle car should be. All in all, it's a pretty amazing build, and I'm glad we had a part in it.
I never thought I'd bring a tear to my eye, but it sure did.
Happy graduation.
Thank you. My dad's my best friend in the whole entire world. I don't know anybody else that could have his friend as their father that builds them the best in classic car. I'm a pretty lucky kid. I have big plans. I want to go on a road trip, show it off. Maybe smoke the tires a little bit, do all that kind of fun stuff, see what kind of trouble I can get into.
Best thing about building old cars is seeing the taillights.
That's right. And they're working. Okay, we got lots of work to do. Let's get on it.
Back at Rust Bros.
Clint's a musician. His second album is coming out. The title of the album is Purple Pontiac. Ergo, we are building a Purple Pontiac. We're going over budget, but it doesn't matter. Because, I mean, his vision, I'm sure, is the same as my vision. He's the same as me. Music, old cars, junk. We're like brothers from another mother. Come on, we got shit to do. I mean, we've got to meet this deadline. Let's go. Let it rip. We've got to make it.
Gotta go straight, Mike.
Making it?
Yeah, it's making it.
Mike and Avery are at Clint's Wrecking Yard in Chilliwack, BC.
Let me hook up the winch.
To unveil his 66 Parisienne.
Hey, actually, here, grab one of these just in case.
Looks like a piece of cheese. I'm f***ing hungry enough to eat it. Okay, get some slack there, Mike.
Okay.
That's good.
Rock it forward.
Come on back.
Yeah. This time, Ave. Okay, go. Yeah. Go. Whoa, hey! The hooks fell off. Good thing I gave you the block, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, put the cover on. There was more rust in that car than just about any vehicle that we have ever done. So it didn't make a lot of money, but to me, it's more about the cars than it is about the money. Come on in, guys! We're gonna get everybody just standing back here, and then we'll bring Clint in and lay the boots to him. Wow, he does have some friends. He told me he did. I thought he was lying.
Clint's invited family and friends to see his new toy.
Hi, what's your name, kid?
Don't talk to strangers.
Okay, yeah. Especially how's it going, guys?
How you doing?
Are we ready?
Holy jeez. Look at the size of that thing.
Hopefully it's purple enough for you, buddy. Is that what you were envisioning?
Ah! Yes! Yes, this is exactly what I was envisioning. Yeah, it's like Christmas. Most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And this is going to turn heads.
Oh, I think so.
I tell you what, you got a timeless piece now that'll make gobs of power.
Check out your upholstery.
This custom upholstery is so frickin' wicked. I don't even know what to say, except for let's see under the hood.
Okay.
My goodness. That LS motor looks so good in there.
Would you like to hear it run?
Let this puppy roll. My goodness. Let's go for a drive.
Should lay a little rubber, Clint.
Okay, hang on. Just a little.
What a sound. I told these guys in the beginning you couldn't make this car too loud for me. And I got what I want, man. It sounds so good. This is my soul car. Big, aggressive, mean.
I tell you what, it was one hell of a build for us.
Definitely our most technical, our first LS swap. A lot of things have been changed, but I think it maintains the same spirit, the same feel.
But just way better.
There's a lot to be said for the newer technology. Pretty amazing motor.
And I'm not going to charge you guys any extra for the learning experience.
Thanks, man.
Alive.
Starting to work there, eh, Clint? Oh, yeah. Almost enough to make an LS believer out of me.
My dream was to have an ultimate cruise machine, and now I have it. It's come true. This is what I was picturing, absolutely. This is the purple Pontiac that I dreamed of. My band Fusionstein's here, and we are using this as our album cover. You know, I used to have to take a little blue pill to get excited, but now I get this big...
In the rusted bowl of the valley where pine forests leaned inward like eavesdroppers and the air smelled of oil, rain, and old arguments, the morning arrived with a thin frost and a thicker silence, the kind that carried memory the way metal carries dents, and Mike Hall stood at the threshold of the shop listening to it, listening to the place he had built with stubborn hands and a laugh sharpened by years of deals gone wrong and miracles gone right, because Rust Valley was not just a yard of cars to him but a biography written in chrome and grease, every hood a chapter, every frame a footnote, and today the valley felt as if it had decided to test him again, to remind him that loyalty and rivalry often wear the same jacket, because Avery Shove was late, and Avery was never late unless he was making a point or nursing a grudge, and Mike could already feel the old tension stretching like a cable between them, the frenemy bond that had powered engines and broken promises in equal measure, a bond born in long nights of wrenching and arguing, in deals sealed with handshakes and undone with silence, and as Mike took a breath and stepped inside, the shop greeted him with its familiar choir of clinks and creaks, the smell of solvents and old leather, the soft accusation of unfinished projects, and he wondered, not for the first time, whether this place had chosen him or whether he had chosen it because it allowed him to be both hero and villain depending on the angle of the light, because Rust Valley had a way of amplifying truths until they rattled, and the truth was that he needed Avery as much as he resented him, that their partnership was an engine tuned to run hot, efficient only at the edge of failure, and this morning's project, a rare, half-buried relic dragged out of a farmer's field the week before, sat under a tarp like a dare, the kind of car that could make or break a season that already felt like it was leaning toward the breaking side. Because money was tight, expectations were louder than ever, and the valley had heard whispers that Mike was losing his touch, whispers carried by tourists and rivals alike, whispers that curled around him like exhaust, and he hated whispers most of all, because they suggested doubt without offering the courtesy of confrontation, and Mike preferred a fight you could see, a problem you could put a wrench on, which was why Avery's absence felt like a provocation, a reminder that some problems had learned to hide in plain sight, and as Mike pulled the tarp back just enough to check the VIN plate again, confirming what he already knew, the rare numbers glinting back at him like a secret shared with a liar, he heard tires crunch on gravel outside, the sound too familiar to be anyone else's, and he straightened, bracing himself, because the thing about frenemies is that the greeting always matters more than the goodbye, that the tone of the first words can determine whether the day ends with profit or bruises, and when Avery walked in, hat tilted, grin half apologetic and half defiant, Mike felt the old reflexes snap into place, the smile that was a shield, the handshake that doubled as a test of strength, the banter that covered the math running in both their heads, calculating leverage, calculating risk, calculating who needed whom more today. And Avery launched into a story about a delayed part and a roadblock that sounded plausible enough to be insulting, and Mike let it pass, because the car under the tap was too important to waste time on posturing, and yet the posturing was unavoidable. It was the tax they paid for knowing each other too well, for sharing history that could not be returned for store credit, history like the winter when they'd gambled everything on a pair of restorations and survived by the thickness of a gasket. History like the deal Avery had taken solo that had nearly sunk the shop. History like the time Mike had sold a car against Avery's advice and watched the buyer flip it for double, each memory a spark that could ignite the present. If handled carelessly, and as they circled the project, Avery's eyes lit with the same hunger Mike felt, the appreciation for lines and potential, for the promise hidden under rust, and for a moment they were aligned again, two craftsmen seeing past decay to possibility, and Mike felt a familiar relief, the sense that whatever else they were, together they could still read the metal like a map. And then Avery said the word partnership in a way that sounded like a negotiation rather than a fact, and the air shifted, because partnership was the word that always carried a knife, the word that meant trust had to be priced, and Mike countered with a joke that landed hard enough to bruise, and Avery's grin tightened, and just like that the valley leaned closer, listening, because this was the story it loved best, the story of two men bound by ambition and friction, bound by a shared refusal to quit even when quitting would be cheaper, and as the morning wore on, the shop filled with the rhythms of work, the scrape of tools, the low murmur of strategy, the occasional flash of irritation, and beneath it all the unspoken question of who would take credit when the car was done, who would shoulder blame if it failed, and Mike caught himself watching Avery's hands, the confidence in them, the way they moved as if they belonged to the car, and he remembered why he had let Avery back in after every rupture, because some people see problems as puzzles and others see them as opportunities to walk away, and Avery, for all his flaws, never walked away from a puzzle, and yet that same trait meant he never walked away from a fight either, and the valley had taught Mike that fights had a way of compounding, of turning small disagreements into structural failures if ignored, and by midday the frost had melted into mud outside, the tourists had begun to gather, phones out, hungry for spectacle, and Mike felt the pressure mount, the need to perform, to narrate his own competence before someone else did it for him, and when a buyer called with an offer on a different car that was tempting but ill-timed, Mike deferred, choosing focus over cash, a choice Avery noticed and filed away, because nothing in Rust Valley went unrecorded, not really, and as the afternoon slid toward evening, they hit a snag, a hidden fracture that would require time and money neither of them wanted to spend, and the debate fled, Avery arguing for a shortcut, Mike insisting on doing it right, the old argument dressed in new clothes, and their voices rose, echoing off the walls, drawing a small crowd, and Mike felt a familiar mix of anger and affection, because Avery's shortcuts had saved them before and cost them later, and the math was never simple, and when Avery accused Mike of playing it safe to protect his image, Mike shot back that Avery's risk appetite was just another way of avoiding responsibility, and the words landed heavy, because they were both true enough to hurt, and for a moment it looked like the day would end in fracture rather than repair, and then something unexpected happened, something Rust Valley specialized in, a reminder that control was an illusion, when a storm rolled in without warning, rain hammering the tin roof, wind howling through the trees, knocking power out across the valley, plunging the shop into a dim, generator-lit half-world where the only sounds were the rain and their breathing, and in that sudden isolation, stripped of audience and electricity, their argument lost momentum, the urgency reframed, and Mike saw Avery not as a rival but as a mirror, another man who had bet his life on machines that refused to behave, another man who knew that sometimes the right call was simply to keep going, and they worked in near silence, hands finding tasks by memory, by trust built in the dark, and when the power finally returned, the storm passing as quickly as it had arrived, they stood back and assessed the damage and the progress, and it wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and Avery clapped Mike on the shoulder with a grin. That was all truce, and Mike felt the old bond settle again, uneasy but intact, and as they closed up for the night, the valley exhaling, Mike thought about the word frenemy, about how it implied a choice between friend and enemy when the truth was messy, when the truth was that some relationships were engines that ran on contradiction, that needed friction to function, and as he locked the door and looked back at the yard of sleeping cars, he wondered how long they could keep this balance. How long before the valley demanded a reckoning, because Rust Valley always collected its debts, and this season, with its rare car and rarer trust, felt like the kind that would ask for payment in full. Morning in Rust Valley never arrived cleanly. It seeped in through fog and rumor, through the metallic smell of dew on steel and the quiet footfalls of tourists who thought they were early but were already late to a story that had started before they woke, and Mike Hall felt that familiar pressure behind his eyes as he rolled open the shop door, the echo announcing him to the cars like a roll call, because the night storm had done more than knock out power. It had unsettled the yard, shifted taps, pulled water in places that promised rust by noon, and today was about assessment, about damage control, about choosing which fires to put out first, and Avery Shove arrived on time this time, which Mike noted without comment because punctuality between them was never neutral, it was either an apology or a challenge, and today it felt like the former, Avery's energy focused, quieter than usual, as if the storm had scrubbed something raw from the air and left them both with fewer places to hide, and they walked the yard together, boots sinking slightly into the mud, inventorying losses and opportunities, because Rust Valley taught you to look at disaster like a ledger, to weigh costs against salvage, and Mike could see Avery's mind ticking through options, calculating which cars could be moved indoors, which would survive another day outside, which might be sacrificed to save time, and it struck Mike how much of their relationship had become a version of this same walk. Circling shared ground, agreeing on the obvious, diverging on the margins, each convinced the other underestimated something critical, and when they reached the rare project from yesterday, now better covered but still exposed in spirit, Avery broke the silence with a suggestion that felt like a concession, proposing a longer timeline, a deeper restoration, a split that favored quality over speed, and Mike felt suspicion flare before gratitude could catch up, because Avery's concessions always came with strings, but the suggestion was sound, and Mike nodded, choosing to bank the goodwill rather than interrogate it, because some days the smartest move was to accept alignment when it appeared, even if you didn't fully trust its source, and the shop filled with activity as the crew arrived, engines coughing awake, radios crackling, and Mike slipped into his role as narrator and conductor, explaining the plan to cameras and customers alike, because in Rust Valley transparency was a currency. The more you explained, the more people forgave delays and detours, and yet even as he spoke, he felt the narrative tugging against him, the unspoken subplot of his partnership with Avery, the way eyes flicked between them, reading body language, searching for cracks, because everyone loved a redemption arc and a collapse even more, and Mike wondered if they could give the valley one without suffering the other. And as the day unfolded, a buyer arrived unannounced, a man with a practiced smile and an accent that suggested distance, who circled the yard with the confidence of someone who believed everything had a price, and Mike engaged him with his usual mix of charm and caution, because buyers like this one were storms of a different kind, capable of washing away inventory or eroding margins, and when the buyer's gaze lingered on the rare project, Mike felt Avery's attention sharpen beside him, the shared instinct flaring, and the buyer made an offer that was generous enough to insult their plans, dangling quick cash in front of a vision that required patience, and Mike declined with a story about provenance and pride, about doing the car justice, and the buyer smiled as if he expected that answer, as if the refusal was part of the dance, and left his card with a promise to return, and as he drove away, Avery let out a low whistle and said the number again, tasting it, and Mike felt the old divergence open up, the fork in the road that had defined So many of their fights, because that money would solve immediate problems, would smooth the season, would quiet the whispers, and Mike knew Avery was already imagining it applied to debts and upgrades, to breathing room, while Mike saw it as a tax on integrity, a shortcut that would haunt them later, and they argued, quietly this time, away from the crew, words measured, barbs sheathed, because yesterday's storm had taught them the cause of escalation, and yet the argument was no less intense for its restraint, because restraint required effort, and effort revealed priorities, and Mike accused Avery of chasing liquidity at the expense of legacy, and Avery countered that legacy didn't pay suppliers, that pride was expensive when margins were thin, and the truth sat between them, heavy and unmoving, and for a moment Mike considered a compromise, a partial sale, a partnership with the buyer, some creative structure that would keep the project alive while easing pressure, and he saw Avery register the shift, saw hope flicker, and that flicker scared Mike more than the argument had, because hope raised expectations, and expectations, once disappointed, calcified into resentment, and he pulled back, insisting on a firm no for now, and Avery nodded, the motion sharp, and said fine in a way that meant not fine at all, and the rest of the afternoon carried that tension like humidity, invisible but oppressive, and the crew felt it, productivity dipping, conversation stalling, until Mike cracked a joke on camera and the mood lifted enough to keep moving, because in Rust Valley performance was part of survival, and as evening approached, Avery suggested they take a drive, to check on the lead, a rumor of a barn find up the valley that might be worth their time, and Mike hesitated, knowing drives were dangerous territory for them, confined spaces where arguments could not easily be escaped, but the lead sounded promising, and distraction had value, so they went, the truck rattling along a narrow road flanked by trees still dripping from the storm, the conversation circling neutral ground at first, past finds, mutual acquaintances, the valley's quirks, until Avery brought up the buyer again, this time with a different angle, proposing that they use the offer as leverage, to attract investors, to raise the shop's profile, and Mike listened, genuinely considering it, because Avery's ideas often contain a kernel of brilliance wrapped in risk, and as they talked, Mike realized something uncomfortable, that Avery's vision for the shop was expanding, that he saw Rust Valley not just as a yard but as a brand, a platform, something that could scale, and Mike felt the old fear stir, the fear of losing the intimacy of the place, of turning craft into content, and he admitted as much, surprising himself with the honesty, and Avery surprised him in turn by acknowledging the risk, by admitting that he sometimes chased growth to outrun his own doubts, that standing still felt like failure to him, and the road unwound beneath them, the valley opening up, and for a brief stretch they were not frenemy but simply friends, two men confessing anxieties to the rhythm of tires on asphalt, and when they reached the rumored barn, they found disappointment, a shell of a car stripped of anything valuable, a reminder that not every lead paid off, and as they stood there in the dim light, Mike laughed, the sound carrying relief, and Avery joined in, and the laughter sealed something, a temporary truce forged by shared anticlimax, and they drove back in companionable silence, the shop lights welcoming them like a huff, and as they unloaded tools and locked up, Avery paused, card from the buyer still in his hand, and asked Mike, quietly, how long he planned to hold the line, and Mike answered with a question of his own, asking how long Avery could live with the uncertainty, and they stood there, the valley holding its breath, because the answers mattered, and neither was ready to give them fully yet, and that night, as Mike lay awake listening to the distant hum of trucks on the highway, he thought about storms and buyers and barn finds, about how every season in Rust Valley seemed to test a different weakness, and he wondered whether this season's test was trust, whether the frenemy bond that had sustained them could evolve without breaking, because the valley did not care about intentions, only outcomes, and outcomes were forged in the choices they would make tomorrow, choices that would either reinforce the uneasy alliance or finally tip it into something irreversible. The third day of the week opened with a brittle kind of sunlight that made every imperfection in Rust Valley sharper, every dent louder, every flake of rust a small accusation, and Mike Hall felt it the moment he stepped outside, the way the light caught the cars and turned them into evidence, proof of promises kept and broken, and he knew before Avery Shove arrived that this would not be a quiet day, because days after near confessions and half-truths never were, they were reckoning days. Disguised as routine, and sure enough Avery rolled in earlier than usual, engine cutting off abruptly, his posture alert, purposeful, the buyer's card no longer visible but not forgotten, and they exchanged a greeting that was polite enough to fool strangers and tense enough to warn anyone who really knew them, because something had shifted, something subtle but consequential. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself with shouting but with careful words and measured steps. And the shop, filled again with the usual noise of labor, the crew settling into tasks, tourists gathering along the fence, cameras hovering like curious birds, and Mike felt the weight of performance settle on his shoulders, because today he had to sell confidence without lying, and that was always the hardest balance, and as he walked the yard explaining projects and plans, he caught Avery watching him with an expression that was not admiration exactly, but analysis, as if Avery were trying to determine whether Mike's certainty was genuine or simply well-practiced, and that look stirred irritation in Mike, because being studied implied doubt, and doubt implied vulnerability, and vulnerability was something Russ Valley exploited ruthlessly, and mid-morning brought a problem that forced them together despite the tension. A customer complained about a previous restoration, a small issue amplified by expectation and money, and Mike and Avery stood shoulder to shoulder again, inspecting the floor, debating responsibility, deciding how much to concede, and the old rhythm returned, the shorthand language of experience, the way they could anticipate each other's arguments before they were spoken, and the resolution came quickly, a compromise that caused less than conflict, and as the customer left satisfied, Mike felt a flicker of reassurance, because whatever else was happening, they still worked well under pressure. And yet reassurance had a way of breeding complacency, and complacency was dangerous, because by noon Avery brought up the buyer again, this time armed with information, details he had gathered quietly, about the buyer's network, his reputation, the way his involvement could elevate Russ Valley's reach, and Mike felt the sting of being outflanked, because Avery had acted unilaterally, even if only by researching, and unilateral action was the fault line in their partnership, the thing that had caused the deepest cracks before, and Mike confronted him, voice low but firm, accusing him of maneuvering, and Avery shot back that preparation wasn't betrayal, that ignoring opportunities was its own kind of recklessness, and the argument drew the attention of the crew, the subtle shift in posture that signaled tension, and Mike hated that, hated exposing internal fractures to an audience, because once seen, they could be exploited, and he shut the conversation down, insisting they talk later, privately, and Avery agreed with visible reluctance, and the rest of the afternoon unfolded under that deferred confrontation like a storm cloud, every task etched with anticipation, every joke falling slightly flat, and Mike found himself distracted, replaying past seasons in his mind, moments when he had trusted Avery's instincts and benefited, moments when he had ignored his own and paid the price, and he wondered whether his resistance now was wisdom earned or fear calcified, because time had a way of turning lessons into limitations if you weren't careful. And late in the day a journalist arrived, looking for a story about Russ Valley's evolution, about how a scrappy yard had become a destination, and Mike found himself answering questions about growth and vision, about partnerships and plans, and he spoke honestly about balance, about respecting the past while adapting to the future, and as he spoke, he could feel Avery listening, weighing each word, and Mike realized that these interviews weren't just public relations, they were negotiations by proxy, signals sent into the partnership, and when the journalist asked about Avery specifically, about their dynamic, Mike paused, choosing his words carefully, describing Avery as indispensable and challenging in equal measure, a man whose ideas pushed the shop forward even when they created friction, and he meant it, but he also knew that words once spoken could not be recalled, that they would shape expectations, and later, as they cleaned up, Avery approached him, expression unreadable, and thanked him for the description, a simple acknowledgement that carried layers, and for a moment, Mike thought they might finally address the real issue head-on, but the moment passed, swallowed by routine, and it wasn't until evening, when the yard had emptied and the lights softened again, that they found themselves alone by the rare project, the car that had become a symbol as much as a machine, and Avery spoke first, laying out his vision fully this time, not as a pitch but as a confession, talking about his fear of stagnation, his belief that Rust Valley could become something larger, without losing its soul, his frustration with always being the one pushing while Mike guarded the gate, and Mike listened, really listened, because there was truth there, and when it was his turn, he spoke of his fear too, fear of delusion, of becoming a curator rather than a craftsman, of waking up one day to find that the shop ran smoothly but meant less, and the silence that followed was heavy but not hostile, the kind of silence that suggests understanding without agreement, and Mike realized that the Frenemy label fit them not because they were enemies pretending to be friends, but because they were friends whose ambitions sometimes put them at odds, and ambition, unlike malice, could not simply be excised, and as they stood there, Avery made a proposal that surprised Mike, suggesting they bring in a neutral third party, an advisor, someone to help structure growth without sacrificing values, and Mike felt resistance rise instinctively, the idea of outside influence prickling his pride, but he also felt curiosity, because it was a compromise that acknowledged both their concerns, and he didn't answer immediately, choosing instead to consider it overnight, and Avery accepted that, nodding, and the acceptance felt like progress, because patience was not Avery's default, and as they locked up and headed their separate ways, Mike felt cautiously hopeful, aware that hope was dangerous but also necessary, because without it the work became mere maintenance, and that night the valley was quiet again, the storm energy spent, and Mike lay awake thinking not about buyers or journalists but about identity, about whether Rust Valley could evolve without losing its essence, about whether his partnership with Avery could transform rather than fracture, and he knew that the answer would not come from theory but from action, from the choices they would make when tested, and the test was coming, he could feel it, because the buyer would return, the media attention would grow, the rare project would demand decisions, and each choice would either reinforce trust or erode it, and as sleep finally claimed him, Mike accepted that frenemy relationships were not problems to be solved but tensions to be managed, engines that required constant tuning, and that the real danger was not conflict but avoidance, not disagreement but silence, and tomorrow, he resolved, there would be less silence, even if it meant more friction, because in Rust Valley, friction was inevitable, but so was movement, and he would rather move forward with sparks than stand still in the dark. The return of the buyer was not announced by phone call or warning but by the low, confident hum of an unfamiliar engine rolling into Rust Valley just after mid-morning, a sound that carried authority with it, the kind of sound that made heads turn and conversations stall, and Mike Hall recognized the tactic instantly, the deliberate entrance meant to unsettle, to remind everyone present that opportunity often arrives on its own terms, and as the buyer stepped out, immaculately dressed, smiling, as though nothing of consequence had been discussed before, Mike felt the pressure spike, because unresolved conversations had a way of demanding resolution at the worst possible moments, and Avery Shove appeared beside him almost immediately, posture alert, eyes sharp, the two of them aligning instinctively like soldiers reacting to the same signal. And for a moment Mike felt that old surge of confidence that came from shared opposition, because no matter how much they disagreed with each other, they were formidable when facing an external force, and the buyer wasted no time, greeting them warmly, complimenting the yacht, the selection, the atmosphere, praising Rust Valley as if it were already a brand he owned a stake in, and Mike bristled at that subtle presumption even as he played along, guiding the buyer through the shop, narrating progress, emphasizing craftsmanship and patience, and Avery followed, adding technical details, future projections, the language of potential. And Mike noticed how naturally Avery slipped into that role, how comfortable he was framing the work as an investment rather than an expression, and that observation stirred both admiration and unease, because it highlighted the fault line between them more clearly than any argument had, and when they reached the rare project, the buyer lingered, running a hand along the exposed metal with the intimacy of someone who imagined possession before permission, and he spoke openly now, referencing his earlier offer, hinting at flexibility, at partnership, at expansion, and he looked deliberately between Mike and Avery as he spoke, as if testing which of them would answer first, which of them would blink, and Mike held his ground, reiterating his commitment to a full restoration before any sale, framing it as non-negotiable, and Avery, after a fraction of a second that felt much longer to Mike, supported him verbally, echoing the stance, and Mike felt a flash of gratitude that surprised him with its intensity, because public alignment mattered, especially now, and the buyer smiled again, unfazed, and suggested lunch, a chance to talk numbers without the noise of the shop, and Mike hesitated, knowing that agreeing meant ceding ground, but refusing outright would escalate things unnecessarily, and he accepted on the condition that Avery joined them, refusing the implicit divide-and-conquer tactic, and the buyer agreed, perhaps amused, perhaps calculating, and as they drove to a nearby diner that had seen more deals fail than succeed, Mike felt the weight of history pressing in, because this was how things changed, not with dramatic ultimatums but with conversations over coffee and pie, and the lunch unfolded like a chess match, the buyer laying out scenarios, minority stakes, distribution opportunities, media tie-ins, and Avery engaging enthusiastically, asking pointed questions, probing details, while Mike listened more than he spoke, interjecting only to set boundaries, to emphasize values, and he could feel the dynamic shifting, the buyer clearly recognizing Avery as the growth-oriented counterpart, the one who spoke his language, and Mike felt the sting of that recognition, because it implied that he was the obstacle rather than the anchor, and when the buyer suggested a timeline that would require accelerating the restoration, Mike objected firmly, and Avery, after a pause, supported him again, and Mike noticed that each time Avery sided with him, it cost Avery something, visible in the tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against the table, and Mike wondered whether Avery's support was genuine agreement or strategic patience, and that uncertainty gnawed at him, because trust built on ambiguity was fragile, and by the time they returned to the shop, no deal had been struck, but the air was charged with possibility, the buyer departing with assurances of follow-up, and as the dust settled, Avery turned to Mike and said they needed to talk, now, not later, and Mike agreed, because postponement was no longer an option, and they retreated to the quieter edge of the yard, away from cameras and crew, the cars standing like witnesses, and Avery spoke first, frustration spilling out, accusing Mike of undervaluing the opportunity, of letting fear dictate strategy, and Mike responded with equal force, accusing Avery of being seduced by skill, of risking the shop's soul for validation, and the argument escalated quickly, words sharpened by weeks of restraint, by years of unresolved tension, and this time there was no storm to interrupt them, no power outage to force collaboration, just the raw confrontation they had been circling, and Avery admitted that he felt perpetually underestimated, that no matter how much he contributed, he was still seen as the risky one, the ideal guy, never the steward, and Mike admitted that he feared Avery's ambition because it mirrored his own younger self, reckless and impatient, and saying it out loud startled them both, because it reframed the conflict not as opposition but as projection, and for a moment the anger drained, replaced by something heavier, recognition, and Avery laughed, a short, humorless sound, and said maybe that was the problem, that Mike had already lived the consequences Avery was still willing to risk, and Mike countered that experience wasn't cowardice, that survival had taught him which risks were worth taking, and the debate settled into a quieter intensity, less about winning and more about understanding, and eventually Avery brought up his proposal again. The idea of a third-party advisor, framing it not as surrender but as evolution, a way to mediate their differences before they calcify into something destructive, and Mike felt the old resistance rise, the instinct to protect his autonomy, but he also felt the cost of stubbornness pressing in, the realization that refusing to adapt was its own form of risk, and he asked who Avery had in mind, and Avery named a figure from the broader restoration world, someone respected for balancing craft and commerce, and Mike considered it, weighing pride against pragmatism, and after a long pause, he agreed to at least meet the person, setting conditions, boundaries, and Avery nodded, relief flickering across his face, and in that moment Mike saw how much this mattered to Avery, not just as a strategy but as validation, and that realization softened him. Because frenemy relationships survive not on constant agreement but on periodic generosity, the willingness to concede without capitulating. And the rest of the day unfolded with a strange calm, their arguments spent, replaced by cautious cooperation, and the crew sensed it, productivity picking up, conversations easing, and Mike found himself narrating the shot with renewed clarity, framing the challenges as part of an ongoing story rather than a crisis, and as evening approached, the buyer's card surfaced again, this time on Mike's workbench, placed there by Avery without comment, not as pressure but as acknowledgement that the decision was still pending, and Mike appreciated that restraint, because it suggested growth, and as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard, Mike reflected on how close they had come to rupture, how easily pride could have tipped the balance, and he wondered whether agreeing to outside advice was a sign of strength or the first step toward losing control, and he knew the answer depended on execution, on whether they could engage the process without surrendering identity, and that night, as the valley quieted, Mike felt the familiar mix of anxiety and resolve that preceded change, because Rust Valley was not static, neither were the men who ran it, and frenemy dynamics were not meant to be resolved once and for all, they were meant to be navigated repeatedly, recalibrated as circumstances shifted, and tomorrow would bring a new variable, perhaps the advisor, perhaps another buyer, perhaps a mechanical failure that demanded attention, and Mike accepted that certainty was a luxury he no longer had, but direction was still within reach, and as he locked up the shop, he allowed himself a cautious optimism, because for the first time in weeks, the conflict with Avery felt less like a zero-sum game and more like a negotiation with the future, and that, he realized, was progress, fragile and provisional, but real. The advisor arrived 2 days later, not with the flourish Mike had half expected but quietly, in a weathered sedan that blended into Rust Valley as if it had been there all along, and that subtlety immediately disarmed Mike in a way he hadn't anticipated, because power that didn't announce itself was harder to resist, and as the man stepped out, taking in the yard with a slow, appreciative gaze, Mike felt an unfamiliar sensation tighten in his chest, something close to vulnerability, because inviting an outsider into Rust Valley was like opening a diary written in oil stains and weld marks, and Avery Shove greeted the advisor with an ease that suggested prior conversations, not secretive but preparatory, and Mike noted it without comment, reminding himself that he had agreed to this, that consent implied trust even when trust felt provisional, and they gathered in the shop office, a space that had seen more arguments than agreements, its walls lined with photographs of past triumphs and near disasters, and the advisor listened more than he spoke at first, encouraging Mike and Avery to recount the shop's history in their own words, not as a joint narrative but as parallel ones, and Mike spoke of beginnings, of scrapyards and stubborn dreams, of building something tangible in a world that increasingly valued speed over substance, while Avery spoke of momentum, of scaling ideas, of frustration with ceilings that felt artificially imposed, and as Mike listened to Avery articulate his vision so clearly, without defensiveness, he felt a strange mix of pride and apprehension, because this was what he had both nurtured and resisted, and the advisor nodded, occasionally asking a question that cut to the bone with surgical precision, questions about decision-making authority, about financial transparency, about conflict resolution, and each question exposed a seam Mike hadn't realized was visible, because Rust Valley had grown organically, guided by instinct. and improvisation rather than structure, and structure, Mike knew, was often the first casualty of passion, and as the conversation unfolded, it became clear that the buyer, the rare project, the media attention were not the core issues but symptoms of a deeper imbalance, a partnership that had never fully renegotiated itself as circumstances changed, and that realization landed heavily, because it implied responsibility on both sides, not just Avery's ambition or Mike's caution, and when the advisor finally offered observations, they were measured and unsparing, pointing out that Rust Valley's success had outpaced its internal agreements, that roles had blurred, expectations diverged, and that without deliberate recalibration, external pressure would inevitably exploit those gaps, and Mike bristled instinctively at the word recalibration, because it suggested mechanical adjustment, a loss of organic flow, but he also recognized its necessity, because machines ignored maintenance. Only until failure forced it, and the meeting ended not with solutions but with assignments, each of them asked to articulate non-negotiables and flexibilities, to define what they were unwilling to sacrifice and where they could bend, and Mike left the office feeling unsettled, because clarity was more threatening than ambiguity, and the rest of the day unfolded under that shadow, the crew working steadily, the rare project inching forward, and Mike found himself scrutinizing every decision through a new lens, asking whether it was habit or intention guiding his hand, and Avery seemed similarly introspective, quieter, more deliberate, and that mutual restraint felt both reassuring and ominous, because silence, when shared, could mean alignment or avoidance, and later that afternoon, the buyer called again, pressing for an update, and Mike, after a brief glance at Avery, deferred decisively, citing internal review, and Avery nodded in agreement, the gesture small but significant. And Mike felt a flicker of trust reignite, because deferral required unity, and unity required communication, and that night, after the shop closed and the valley settled into its nocturnal hush, Mike stayed behind, sitting alone among the cars, the glow of a single work light illuminating the rare project, and he thought about his non-negotiables, about craftsmanship, autonomy, identity, about the fear that growth would hollow out meaning, and he wondered how much of that fear was grounded in reality and how much in nostalgia, because nostalgia was seductive, a way of sanctifying the past to avoid confronting the future, and he realized that part of his resistance to change was rooted not in principle but in loss, the loss of the scrappy intimacy that had defined Rust Valley's early years, and acknowledging that loss hurt, but it also freed him, because it allowed him to separate values from methods, to consider that protecting the soul of the shop might require evolving its body, and the next day brought another test, a mechanical setback on the rare project that threatened to derail timelines and budgets, and Mike and Avery tackled it together, arguing constructively, weighing options, and this time the argument resolved without residue, decisions made and accepted, and the ease of that resolution startled Mike, because it suggested that the advisor's intervention had already shifted something fundamental, that naming tensions had reduced their power, and as word of the setback spread, tourists leaned in, hungry for drama, and Mike addressed them candidly, framing the delay as part of the process, and the honesty resonated, because people respected struggle when it was contextualized, and later, as Avery reviewed numbers and projections, he approached Mike with a proposal that balanced ambition and restraint, a phased plan that preserved quality while exploring growth incrementally, and Mike listened, genuinely considering it, because it aligned with the non-negotiables he had identified, and he realized that Avery's vision was not inherently opposed to his own, it was simply articulated from a different vantage point, and that insight softened the frenemy dynamic further, turning rivalry into a productive tension rather than a threat, and by the end of the week, the advisor returned for a brief follow-up, satisfied with the progress but cautioning that alignment was not a one-time achievement but a practice, something that required ongoing attention, and Mike appreciated that realism, because Rust Valley had taught him that nothing stayed fixed for long, and as the sun set on another day, casting the yard in amber light, Mike stood beside Avery, watching the cars rest like patient animals, and he felt a tentative confidence that they were entering a new phase, not free of conflict but better equipped to navigate it, and he knew that the buyer would not disappear, that external pressure would intensify, that success would bring its own complications, but he also knew that frenemy relationships, when tended with honesty and respect, could evolve into something resilient, something capable of withstanding storms without collapsing, and as he locked the shop and headed home, Mike accepted that the future of Rust Valley would be forged not by avoiding tension but by harnessing it, by turning friction into forward motion, and that realization, hard-won and still fragile, felt like the most valuable restoration of all. The first real fracture of the season did not announce itself with raised voices or slammed doors but with a quiet discrepancy in numbers, a small misalignment in the ledger that Mike Hall noticed late one evening when the yard had emptied and the shop lights cast long, tired shadows across the concrete, because Mike had learned over decades that big failures almost always began as small inconsistencies, the kind people ignored because they were inconvenient to investigate, and as he stared at the figures, comparing projected costs to actual expenditures on the rare project, he felt that old tightening in his gut, the instinct that told him something had shifted beneath his feet without asking permission, and when he traced the discrepancy back to a set of parts ordered earlier that week, parts more expensive than what they had agreed on, parts that suggested an upgraded approach, he knew before asking that Avery Shove had authorized them, not maliciously, not secretly even, but decisively, confidently, as if the conversation they had shared with the advisor had already given him license to act, and Mike sat there longer than necessary, wrestling with the familiar dilemma of timing, because confronting Avery immediately would satisfy emotion but risk escalation, while waiting would allow resentment to calcify, and Rust Valley had taught him that both extremes carried costs, and by the time Avery returned from locking up another section of the yard, Mike had decided that this confrontation would be neither explosive nor deferred, but precise, and when Avery walked in, wiping his hands on a rag, humming softly as if the day had gone exactly according to plan, Mike felt a flash of irritation sharpen his resolve, and he spoke calmly, holding up the invoice without accusation, asking simply when the decision had been made, and Avery stopped, the hum fading, his expression shifting from casual to alert, and for a moment Mike thought Avery might deflect or justify immediately, but instead Avery sighed and sat down, acknowledging the order openly, explaining that the upgrade would save time later, improve quality, increase resale value, and their explanation, rational and well-constructed, made Mike's irritation flare hotter, because rational justifications were often used to paper over breaches of process, and Mike countered that the issue was not the parts themselves but the unilateral decision, the assumption of authority in an area they had explicitly agreed to review together, and Avery bristled, reminding Mike that they had agreed to move faster, to trust each other's judgment more, and Mike snapped back that trust did not eliminate consultation, that speed without alignment was just another way to drift apart, and the argument escalated, not loudly, but intensely, words chosen carefully and delivered with precision, each man drawing lines around his interpretation of their new understanding, and the shop seemed to absorb the tension, the cars looming like silent arbiters, and what made the confrontation more volatile than previous ones was the sense that both men felt justified, that neither saw himself as violating the agreement, and that mutual certainty is far more dangerous than overt disagreement, because it leaves little room for compromise, and as the debate stretched on, Avery accused Mike of hiding behind process to maintain control, of agreeing to change in theory while resisting it in practice, and Mike accused Avery of using momentum as an excuse to bypass collaboration, of confusing initiative with leadership, and the words landed hard, because they struck at identity rather than behavior, and Mike felt the familiar fear surface, the fear that this partnership was slowly reenacting its oldest pattern under new language, and when Avery finally stood, pacing, frustration evident, he admitted that he was tired of feeling constrained, of constantly second-guessing decisions that he believed in. And Mike responded that leadership meant restraint as much as action, that shared ownership required shared consent, and the silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of wind moving through trees, and in that pause Mike realized something unsettling, that while he believed he was protecting the shop, Avery believed he was protecting its future, and both beliefs were sincere, and sincerity did not guarantee compatibility, and eventually Avery spoke again, quieter now, acknowledging that he should have raised the decision first, but insisting that waiting would have cost them time they didn't have, and Mike accepted the partial apology without yielding the principle, insisting that future decisions of that magnitude require discussion regardless of urgency, and Avery nodded, the nod stiff, agreement without enthusiasm, and they settled on a compromise, keeping the parts but adjusting future protocols, and while the practical issue was resolved, the emotional residue lingered, because compromises that feel forced often do, and over the next few days that residue manifested in subtle ways, in shorter conversations, in parallel work rather than collaborative effort, in a sense that they were temporarily out of sync, and the Valley noticed, because Rust Valley always did, tourists sensing the shift, cameras capturing quieter interactions, speculation filling the gaps, and Mike found himself narrating more carefully, emphasizing teamwork in words even when the reality felt strained, and that dissonance weighed on him, because authenticity was a currency he valued, and spending it too freely risked inflation, and matters escalated when the buyer resurfaced yet again, this time bypassing Mike and reaching out directly to Avery with a proposal that included not just investment but operational influence, and Avery, to his credit, brought the message to Mike immediately, but the very existence of the offer inflamed the tension, because it validated Avery's instincts while challenging Mike's boundaries, and they argued again, this time over whether even entertaining such proposals compromised their autonomy, and Mike insisted on a firm refusal, while Avery argued that information itself was not contamination, that understanding the landscape strengthened their position, and the argument spilled into a late-night work session, the two men laboring on separate sides of the same car, hands busy while minds sparred, and Mike felt the exhaustion seep in, the fatigue that made every disagreement feel larger, more personal, and at one point, in a moment of unguarded honesty, Avery admitted that he feared being left behind, that if Rust Valley remained static, his role would shrink rather than grow, and that confession startled Mike, because it reframed Avery's ambition not as greed but as anxiety, and Mike responded in kind, admitting that he feared losing authorship of the shop's story, becoming a spokesperson rather than a builder, and in that exchange, raw and imperfect, the frenemy dynamic softened again, the edge blunted by shared vulnerability, and yet vulnerability did not resolve the structural questions they faced, it only humanized them, and the advisor returned shortly after, sensing the renewed friction, and facilitated another conversation, this one focused not on decisions but on communication thresholds, on defining what required consensus and what could be handled independently, and Mike found the exercise uncomfortable but clarifying, because it forced him to articulate boundaries he had previously enforced instinctively, and Avery found it challenging to accept constraints that limited spontaneity, but he engaged, recognizing that structure could protect relationships as much as it constrained them, and by the end of that session, they had outlined a tentative framework, imperfect but functional, and the shop settled into a cautious rhythm again, productivity steady but subdued, and as the rare project neared a critical milestone, the stakes rose, because its completion would force decisions about sale, display, or partnership, and Mike felt a familiar pressure mount, the sense that this season was accelerating toward a defining moment, and one evening, standing alone in the yard after Avery had left, Mike walked among the cars, running his hand along cool metal, grounding himself in the physical reality of the work, and he thought about how many times he had faced similar crossroads, how often he had chosen stability over expansion, and he wondered whether that pattern was wisdom or habit, and whether Avery's presence in his life was not a challenge to his authority but an invitation to evolve, and that thought unsettled him, because evolution implied loss as well as gain, and as he looked up, the valley quiet and watchful, Mike accepted that frenemy relationships did not resolve neatly, they oscillated, tightening and loosening like belts under load, and that part 6 of this season was not about resolution but about exposure, about revealing the fault lines clearly enough to reinforce them before they split, and he knew that the next phase would demand a choice. Not just about money or growth, but about identity, and that choice would test whether the fragile alignment they had built could withstand real pressure, because Rust Valley, for all its beauty and grit, was not a place that rewarded indecision for long. The day the rare project finally rolled under its own power again arrived without ceremony, the engine's first sustained idle cutting through Rust Valley like a held breath finally released, and Mike Hall felt the vibration in his chest before he allowed himself the relief, because years in the valley had trained him to distrust early victories, to listen for the second sound after the first, the knock that followed the purr, the leak that followed the seal, and as the engine settled into a steady rhythm, he watched Avery shove closely, not to judge the machine but to read the man, because moments like this had a way of clarifying loyalties and priorities, and Avery's face carried a mixture of pride and calculation, the craftsman satisfied and the strategist already projecting next steps, and Mike felt that familiar ambivalence tighten again, admiration braided with unease, because success amplified differences rather than smoothing them, and the crew gathered, applause breaking out organically, cameras catching the moment, tourists cheering as if they understood what it cost to get here, and Mike stepped forward to narrate, grounding the spectacle in process, crediting the team, emphasizing patience and precision, while Avery added technical context and future possibilities, and for a moment they were perfectly synchronized, the frenemy dynamic humming at peak efficiency, and Mike allowed himself to enjoy it, because joy in Rust Valley was earned, and earned joy was rare, but the echo of the engine had barely faded before the buyer's presence asserted itself again, this time not in person but through a carefully worded message that arrived on both their phones simultaneously, congratulating them on the milestone, requesting a meeting, and attaching a revised proposal that reflected the car's increased value, and Mike felt the pressure spike anew, because the proposal was undeniably attractive, structured cleverly to address some of his concerns while still advancing Avery's growth-oriented agenda, and Avery looked at him with that familiar expression, half question, half challenge, and suggested they at least hear the buyer out, framing it as due diligence rather than capitulation, and Mike hesitated, aware that refusing outright would harden positions while agreeing could open doors he wasn't ready to walk through, and they compromised again, scheduling a meeting on neutral ground, insisting on terms that limited scope, and the compromise felt both prudent and exhausting, because constant negotiation drained energy even when it preserved relationships, and the meeting took place the following day in a space deliberately chosen for its anonymity, a quiet conference room that stripped away the romance of the yard and forced the conversation into abstraction, and the buyer arrived prepared, presentation polished, numbers compelling, language calibrated to appeal to both Mike's values and Avery's ambitions, and Mike listened intently, noting how the buyer framed Rust Valley as a narrative asset, a story that could be leveraged across platforms, and that framing triggered Mike's deepest resistance, because stories, once leveraged, often lost their intimacy, and when it was Mike's turn to speak, he emphasized control, autonomy, the right to say no even when money said yes, and Avery followed, emphasizing sustainability, skill, and resilience, and the buyer smiled, clearly enjoying the contrast, and proposed a pilot arrangement. Limited in duration and scope, designed to test compatibility without full commitment, and Mike felt the room tilt, because the proposal was reasonable, difficult to dismiss without seeming inflexible, and he asked for time, for internal discussion, and the buyer agreed, leaving them alone with the decision, and the silence that followed was heavier than any argument, because now the choice was explicit, unavoidable, and Avery spoke first, arguing that this was the balance they had been searching for, a chance to experiment without surrender, and Mike countered that experiments often created precedents, that temporary arrangements had a way of becoming permanent through inertia, and the debate intensified, voices rising despite their efforts to remain measured, because this was no longer theoretical, it was personal, and Avery accused Mike of defaulting to fear whenever uncertainty appeared. And Mike accused Avery of underestimating how quickly values could be diluted once outside influence took hold, and the argument spiraled until Avery finally said the thing Mike had dreaded hearing, that if Russ Valley did not evolve, Avery might have to consider his own future independently, and the words landed like a dropped tool, loud and irrevocable, and Mike felt a surge of anger and hurt, because the threat, even implied, cut deep, challenging the foundation of their partnership, and he responded sharply, telling Avery that independence was always an option, but partnership required compromise, and the confrontation escalated, old grievances surfacing, past decisions relitigated, the frenemy dynamic tipping dangerously toward open hostility, and it took the intervention of the advisor, who had been monitoring the process quietly, to halt the spiral, reminding them that ultimatums ended conversations rather than resolving them, and urging a pause, a cooling-off period before any decision was made, and reluctantly they agreed, separating for the evening. Emotions raw, and Mike returned to Russ Valley alone, walking the yard under a sky heavy with stars, the cars reflecting points of light like distant possibilities, and he felt the weight of the moment settle, because for the first time he could envision a future where Avery was not beside him, and that vision hurt more than he expected, because despite everything, Avery was woven into the fabric of Russ Valley, into its rhythms and its risks, and Mike questioned whether his resistance was truly about protecting the shop or about protecting himself from loss, and that night he barely slept, replaying the argument, considering alternative responses, and when morning came, it brought not clarity but urgency, because Avery did not arrive at his usual time, and when he did arrive, it was with a different energy, subdued, reflective, and he approached Mike without preamble, apologizing for the ultimatum, admitting that it had been born of frustration rather than intention, and Mike felt his own defenses soften, because apology, when sincere, had power, and he apologized in turn for dismissing Avery's fears too readily, and they stood there, two men stripped of posturing, acknowledging that the partnership was at a crossroads, and they agreed to one more step, a temporary internal separation of roles during the pilot phase, if they chose to proceed, with clear boundaries and review points, and the agreement felt fragile but hopeful, because it acknowledged both the need for evolution and the fear of erosion, and as they prepared to reconvene with the buyer, Mike realized that part 7 of this season was about brinkmanship, about standing at the edge without falling, about recognizing that frenemy relationships survive not by avoiding ultimatums but by surviving them, by pulling back from the brink and redefining the terms of engagement, and he knew that the decision ahead would either formalize that evolution or expose its limits, because Russ Valley did not tolerate half measures for long, and as the engine of the rare project cooled in the background, ticking softly like a clock, Mike understood that time, not money, was the most valuable currency at stake, time to decide who they were becoming and whether they could become it together. The pilot phase began not with signatures and champagne but with a silence that settled over Russ Valley like an early fog, the kind that softened edges while hiding hazards, and Mike Hall felt it the moment he unlocked the shop at dawn, the yard unusually still, the cars waiting as if aware that they were no longer just projects but variables in a larger equation, and the decision to proceed, tentative and conditional, had been made late the night before after hours of passing clauses and consequences, after Avery Shove had insisted on safeguards and Mike had insisted on vetoes, and the buyer had accepted with the patience of someone confident that time favored him, and as Mike flipped on the lights and listened to the hum fill the space, he felt the paradox of relief and dread, because choosing a path, even a risky one, relieved the burden of indecision while introducing a new burden of accountability, and Avery arrived shortly after, greeting Mike with a nod that acknowledged both alliance and distance, the temporary separation of roles already shaping their body language, Avery stepping into an operational focus that leaned outward toward opportunity, Mike anchoring inward toward craft and continuity, and the crew sensed the shift immediately, the way people always did when power dynamics recalibrated, conversations adjusting, questions redirected, eyes flicking between the two men to see who would answer, and Mike found himself correcting that instinct gently but firmly, redirecting decisions that fell under Avery's temporary purview and reclaiming those that did not, because clarity was the currency they had agreed to spend generously, and the morning passed in a flurry of organization, schedules revised, access delineated, communication protocols established, and it felt oddly bureaucratic for a place that had thrived on improvisation, but Mike reminded himself that structure was not the enemy of soul, neglect was, and as the buyer's representatives arrived to observe, not interfere, the tension spiked again, because observation carried judgment even when it claimed neutrality, and Mike addressed them directly, setting expectations about boundaries and respect, and to his surprise, Avery supported him emphatically, reinforcing the message with language that framed the shop as a living system rather than a resource to be mined, and Mike felt a flicker of gratitude again, because public alignment still mattered, perhaps more now than ever. And the rare project, freshly alive, became the focal point of attention, its presence a reminder of what was at stake, and as the representatives asked questions about process and timelines, Mike answered with measured candor, refusing to oversell, while Avery translated those answers into strategic milestones, and the dance between them was delicate, requiring constant awareness, and by midday the observers departed, satisfied enough for now, and the shop exhaled, the crew returning to a more familiar rhythm, and Mike took a moment alone by the car, hand resting on warm metal, grounding himself again, because grounding was essential when narratives threatened to outrun reality, and the afternoon brought its first test of the pilot arrangement when a decision arose that sat squarely on the boundary between craft and strategy, a request to document certain restoration steps for external use, and Avery leaned toward approval, seeing the value in transparency and storytelling, while Mike hesitated, concerned about distraction and delusion, and instead of arguing, they consulted the framework they had agreed upon, mapping the decision against criteria, and the process slowed them down just enough to find a compromise, limited documentation, control release, and the decision, once made, felt surprisingly clean, leaving no residue, and Mike noted that with cautious optimism, because it suggested that rules, when respected, could preserve relationships rather than constrain them, and yet the day was not without friction, because friction was inevitable, and it arrived in the form of an unexpected visitor, a former associate of Avery's who arrived with an offer adjacent to the buyer's influence, a side opportunity that promised exposure but threatened to blur lines, and Avery handled it deftly, deferring politely, redirecting through agreed channels, and Mike watched closely, recognizing effort when he saw it, and that recognition mattered, because trust was rebuilt not through declarations but through patterns, and as the sun dipped and the shop prepared to close, Avery approached Mike with a report, detailing interactions and next steps, a transparency that would have felt excessive before but now felt necessary, and Mike listened, asked questions, and approved adjustments, and the exchange felt professional, respectful, almost formal, and that formality carried its own risk, because warmth mattered too, and later that evening, after the crew had left, Mike and Avery shared a beer by the open door, the yard quiet, the sky streaked with fading light, and the conversation drifted away from business toward memory, recalling early days when decisions were made on instinct and luck, when survival left little room for philosophy, and Avery admitted that he sometimes missed that simplicity, that clarity born of scarcity, and Mike admitted that he sometimes feared that growth would erase those memories rather than honor them, and the admission breached something, because it reframed the conflict as a shared mourning for a past that could not be fully preserved, and as the days of the pilot phase accumulated, patterns emerged, some encouraging, some concerning, and Mike found himself navigating a new identity as steward rather than sole arbiter, and that shift was uncomfortable, challenging his sense of self, but it also freed him in unexpected ways, allowing deeper focus on the work he loved, the hands-on craft, and Avery, free from the need to push against resistance constantly, seemed more measured, more reflective, his ambition tempered by responsibility, and yet external pressure did not ease, because success attracted scrutiny, and a media piece framed Russ Valley's evolution in terms that felt too neat, too triumphant, and Mike bristled at the narrative, while Avery saw opportunity in correcting it through engagement, and they debated, again consulting the framework, again finding a middle path. And Mike realized that part 8 of this season was about habituation, about learning to live within a new normal without mistaking it for permanence, because pilot phases, by definition, ended, and the question looming over everything was what would follow, and one evening, as Mike reviewed footage and notes alone, he noticed a comment from a viewer that cut through the noise, praising the work while lamenting the loss of intimacy, and the comment stayed with him, because it echoed his own fears, and he brought it to Avery the next day, not as accusation but as data, and Avery received it thoughtfully, acknowledging the risk and proposing an event that recentered the community, a way to reconnect without spectacle, and Mike agreed, heartened by the gesture, because it suggested that Avery's vision could include preservation as well as expansion, and the event, modest and earnest, reminded Mike why Russ Valley mattered beyond profit, drawing locals and enthusiasts alike, conversations grounded in shared appreciation rather than consumption, and watching Avery engage genuinely, not performatively. Mike felt a cautious warmth, because frenemy relationships thrive on proof, and proof was accumulating, and yet the buyer, ever patient, pressed gently for metrics, for indicators that justified further commitment, and Mike resisted the urge to rush, insisting on completing the pilot on its own terms, and Avery backed him publicly, even as he negotiated timelines privately, and that duality, once a source of conflict, now felt coordinated, and as the pilot neared its midpoint, the advisor returned to assess progress, noting improvements in communication and clarity while warning against complacency, reminding them that systems failed when taken for granted, and Mike took that to heart, recommitting to vigilance, and one night, alone in the yard again, Mike reflected on how far they had come since the ultimatum, how the brink had sharpened their focus rather than breaking them, and he acknowledged that frenemy dynamics, when handled with intention, could evolve into a partnership that was both resilient and adaptive, and he knew that the next phase would test that evolution further, because decisions deferred would soon be due, and the rare project, now nearing completion, would force a reckoning about sale, display, or something entirely new, and as the valley settled into sleep, Mike accepted that certainty would remain elusive, but process, trust, and shared purpose offered a compass, imperfect but usable, and that, he decided, was enough to keep moving forward together, at least for now. The end of the pilot phase did not arrive with a deadline circled on a calendar but with a convergence of small pressures that suddenly aligned, like gears finally meshing after weeks of sleeping, and Mike Hall felt it in the pit of his stomach as he walked the yard one early morning, the rare project sitting complete now, polished and awake, no longer a promise but a fact, because finished things demanded decisions in a way unfinished ones did not, and Russ Valley had grown accustomed to living in the comfortable ambiguity of work in progress, where intention could still masquerade as outcome, and Avery Shove joined him silently, the two men standing shoulder to shoulder, looking at the car as if it were a third partner in their uneasy alliance, and neither spoke at first because words had weight here, and Mike was acutely aware that whatever happened next would be read as precedent, by the buyer, by the crew, by the audience that now followed every move, and perhaps most of all by Avery himself, whose patience had been tested and partially rewarded but not yet fully resolved, and when Avery finally broke the silence, he did not argue or propose but asked a question that cut deeper than any pitch, asking Mike what he actually wanted to happen next, not strategically, not defensively, but honestly, and Mike was struck by the simplicity of it, because honesty was often the most disruptive option, and he answered slowly, admitting that he wanted the car to be seen. Not flip quickly, that he wanted it to stand as proof that Russ Valley could still produce something uncompromised even under pressure, and Avery nodded, absorbing that, and responded with his own honesty, admitting that he wanted the work to open doors, to create momentum that extended beyond a single build, because momentum, to him, was survival in another form, and the exchange set the tone for the day, because it framed the decision not as a binary but as a negotiation between values that were both legitimate. And later that morning the buyer arrived again, this time accompanied by a smaller entourage, the pilot's conclusion clearly shifting the dynamic, because observation had given way to expectation, and they gathered in the shop, the car positioned deliberately as the focal point, and the buyer spoke first, praising the result, acknowledging the integrity of the process, and then presenting a final proposal that synthesized previous discussions, offering a public unveiling event under the Russ Valley banner, followed by a timed sale with revenue-sharing provisions and retained creative control for Mike and operational input for Avery, and Mike listened carefully, because the proposal was designed to appeal to both of them, and in many ways it did, but he also heard the subtle pull toward urgency, the assumption that momentum demanded immediate capitalization, and he asked questions, probing contingencies, exit clauses, protections against mission drift. And the buyer answered confidently, perhaps too confidently, and Mike felt a familiar instinct to slow things down, while Avery leaned forward, energized by the clarity, and the tension between them surfaced again, not as conflict but as divergence, and the buyer, perceptive as ever, suggested they take time to discuss privately, stepping away with his team, and the moment the door closed, the air shifted, because now there was no audience to perform for, only a choice to make, and Avery spoke passionately, arguing that the proposal honored Mike's desire for visibility without immediate surrender, that it created a narrative arc that benefited Russ Valley rather than exploiting it, and Mike countered that narratives, once externalized, became harder to control, that public unveilings created expectations that could outpace reality, and the debate was intense but measured, both men drawing on the lessons of the pilot phase, referencing frameworks and boundaries rather than grievances, and that alone felt like progress, and as the conversation deepened, Mike surprised himself by conceding ground. Acknowledging that his instinct to protect could become stifling, that refusing to share the work entirely risked isolating Russ Valley from a changing world, and Avery, in turn, surprised Mike by conceding that speed was not always synonymous with growth, that sometimes letting the work speak on its own terms created more durable value, and the mutual concessions shifted the energy, transforming the debate from adversarial to collaborative, and they began to shape an alternative, modifying the proposal to emphasize community engagement over spectacle, to prioritize control exposure rather than mass reach, and when they invited the buyer back in, Mike presented the counterproposal himself, asserting terms with a calm authority that surprised even him, and the buyer listened, recalculating, and while some points were contested, the buyer ultimately agreed to a revised arrangement, recognizing perhaps that Russ Valley's value lay precisely in its resistance to being rushed, and the agreement, provisional but concrete, was set in motion, and with it came the next challenge, the unveiling event itself, which Mike insisted be grounded in the local community rather than a glossy production, and Avery threw his energy into organizing it, balancing logistics with authenticity, and the days leading up to the event were a blur of preparation, the crew working with renewed purpose, the yacht transformed subtly to accommodate visitors without losing its character, and Mike found himself both anxious and proud, because opening Russ Valley in this way felt like inviting judgment but also like honoring the work, and the night of the unveiling arrived with a crisp clarity, the sky dark and star-filled, the yacht lit warmly, cars gleaming softly rather than theatrically, and locals mingled with enthusiasts, conversations flowing easily, and when Mike stepped forward to speak, he did so without a script, talking about the valley, about patience, about the people who made the work possible, and he felt the words land, not as marketing but as testimony, and Avery followed, speaking about evolution and opportunity, framing growth as stewardship rather than conquest, and Mike listened, genuinely moved, because Avery's language had shifted, reflecting lessons learned, and the car was revealed not with dramatic flair but with quiet confidence, applause rippling through the crowd. And in that moment Mike felt something settle, a sense that this compromise, this shared approach, might actually work, and the buyer watched from the edge, satisfied but not dominant, and as the event wound down, Mike and Avery stood together again, watching people linger, and Avery said quietly that this felt right, and Mike agreed, because it did, not perfect but aligned, and yet as the night deepened and the last guest departed, Mike knew that this was not an ending but a pivot, because the sale would follow, attention would continue, and new pressures would emerge, and when the buyer approached them one final time that night, congratulating them and hinting at future collaborations, Mike responded with cautious openness rather than reflexive resistance, and Avery noticed, and that noticing mattered, because it signaled trust, and later, alone again, Mike walked the yard, the echoes of the event still present, and he reflected on how close they had come to fracture, how easily the frenemy dynamic could have tipped into separation, and he recognized that what had saved them was not agreement but engagement, the willingness to stay in the conversation even when it hurt, and part 9 of this season, he realized, was about synthesis, about finding a third path between preservation and expansion, and he knew that synthesis was fragile, requiring constant attention, but it was also powerful, because it allowed Rust Valley to remain itself while becoming something more, and as he locked up and headed home, Mike accepted that the future would continue to test this balance, that success would bring new buyers, new temptations, new conflicts, and that Avery would continue to push while he continued to guard, and that perhaps this tension, properly tended, was not a flaw but the engine itself, and that realization brought him a quiet confidence, because engines, after all, were what Rust Valley understood best, and this one, for now, was running strong. The morning after the unveiling carried a peculiar stillness, the kind that follows an emotional high and makes ordinary sounds feel amplified, and Mike Hall noticed it immediately as he walked into the shop, the echo of his footsteps bouncing off metal and concrete as if the place itself were pausing to listen, and the car, now revealed and admired and discussed, sat quietly again, no longer the center of attention but heavier somehow, imbued with consequence, because attention had a way of changing the weight of things, and Avery Shove arrived shortly after, energized but visibly tired, the aftereffects of organization and performance returned in the slump of his shoulders, and they exchanged a brief smile that acknowledged shared success without pretending exhaustion did not exist, and for a moment they simply worked side by side, checking tools, reviewing notes, easing back into routine, because routine was the antidote to spectacle, and yet it did not take long for the next wave of pressure to arrive, because success rarely rested, and by mid-morning messages began to trickle in from interested parties, collectors, media, intermediaries, or expressing enthusiasm, or asking questions that pointed toward valuation and timing, and Mike felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the instinctive recoil from being hurried, while Avery saw the messages as evidence that the strategy was working, and rather than arguing, they scheduled a meeting, deliberately formal, to assess options, because the pilot phase had taught them the value of naming moments rather than letting them ambush the relationship, and they gathered in the small office, coffee cups steaming, documents spread out, and Mike opened by restating their shared priorities, integrity of the work, sustainability of the shop, respect for the community, and Avery followed by outlining the opportunities now on the table, not embellishing, simply mapping possibilities, and the clarity of the exchange surprised both of them, because it demonstrated how far they had come from the days when conversations dissolved into defensiveness, and yet the central question remained unresolved, when and how to sell, because the sale represented both validation and loss, and Mike voiced his concern that moving too quickly would reduce the car to a transaction rather than a statement, while Avery countered that waiting too long risked diminishing momentum and confusing partners, and the debate unfolded slowly, methodically, neither man raising his voice, each listening more than he spoke, and eventually they arrive at a provisional plan, a defined window for sale, long enough to allow the car to be displayed locally and short enough to retain relevance, and the compromise felt reasonable, but Mike knew that reason did not eliminate emotion, and later that day, alone again by the car, he grappled with a sense of impending goodbye, because selling was not just an exchange of money but a relinquishment of story, and that night he dreamed of the early days, of dragging rusted shells out of the woods, of promises made to himself about never letting the work become hollow, and he woke with a renewed determination to guard those promises even as he adapted them, and Avery, too, wrestled with his own reflections, though he rarely spoke of them, and when he did, it was later that week, unexpectedly, during a late-night work session when only the two of them remained, the shop lit dimly, tools scattered, and Avery admitted that he feared becoming irrelevant, that pushing for growth was not just ambition but anxiety, a response to the creeping sense that without expansion he might fade into the background of a story he helped build, and Mike listened, genuinely, recognizing the vulnerability beneath the drive, and in that moment the frenemy dynamic softened again, replaced briefly by empathy, because fear, once named, lost some of its power, and the days passed, filled with preparation for the sale window, logistics arranged, documentation finalized, communication managed carefully, and the buyer maintained a respectful distance, honoring the revised terms, and that restraint built confidence, because restraint was often harder than intrusion, and as the window approached, an unexpected complication arose, a regulatory issue tied to transport and provenance that threatened to delay the sale, and Avery reacted swiftly, mobilizing contacts, exploring solutions, while Mike focused on ensuring that any resolution did not compromise transparency, and the problem tested their alignment. Again, because shortcuts were tempting, but they resisted, choosing patience over expedience, and the delay, while frustrating, reinforced their commitment to process, and when the issue was resolved cleanly, without corners cut, Mike felt a surge of pride, not just in the outcome but in how they handled it, and the sale window finally opened quietly, without fanfare, inquiries managed discreetly, offers reviewed carefully, and one offer stood out, not the highest but the most aligned, from a collector who expressed genuine appreciation for the work and a willingness to keep the car accessible for future events, and Mike felt drawn to that alignment, while Avery evaluated the terms strategically, and for once their instincts converged without debate, and they accepted the offer, and the decision, once made, brought a surprising calm, because uncertainty, more than risk, had been the true source of tension, and the transaction unfolded smoothly, the handover respectful, the story honored, and when the car finally left the yard, Mike watched it go with a mix of sadness and satisfaction, because letting go was part of stewardship too, and the yard felt emptier but also ready, as if space had been cleared for whatever came next, and the sale reverberated outward, bringing new attention but also new credibility, and the buyer, pleased with the outcome, proposed extending the partnership beyond the pilot, suggesting a longer-term collaboration with defined safeguards, and Mike and Avery approached the proposal with caution, informed by experience, and they agreed to explore it without rushing, because Part 10, Mike realized, was about consolidation, about turning hard-won lessons into durable practice, and as they sat together reviewing the new proposal, the dynamic between them felt altered, not resolved but matured, the frenemy tension now tempered by mutual respect, and Avery acknowledged that Mike's insistence on boundaries had strengthened the brand rather than limiting it, while Mike acknowledged that Avery's push for engagement had kept Rust Valley from stagnating, and the acknowledgements mattered, because they reframed past conflicts as contributions rather than obstacles, and as winter edged closer, the shop settled into a steadier rhythm, projects chosen carefully, expectations managed deliberately, and the crew sensed the shift, working with renewed confidence. And Mike felt a cautious optimism, because while challenges remained inevitable, they now had tools to face them together, and as he locked up one night, he reflected that frenemy relationships were not about erasing difference but about harnessing it, and that Rust Valley, forged in rust and persistence, was uniquely suited to that kind of work, and he knew that the next chapter would test this balance again, because nothing stayed stable for long, but for now, the engine hummed steadily, tuned by tension rather than threatened by it, and that was enough to keep moving forward. Winter arrived in Rust Valley not as a dramatic storm but as a slow tightening of the air, a creeping quiet that settled into the yard and pressed against the walls of the shop, and Mike Hall felt the change immediately, because winter had always been the season that stripped things down to essentials, exposing what could endure and what merely pretended to, and with the rare car sold and gone, the space it left behind became symbolic, an empty rectangle of frozen ground that reminded everyone daily that chapters closed whether you were ready or not, and the crew adapted to the cold with practiced efficiency, heaters humming, hands gloved when possible, breath visible in the early mornings, and Avery Shove leaned into the rhythm with a renewed intensity, perhaps because the absence of the car created a vacuum he instinctively wanted to fill, and proposals began circulating again, smaller than before but more numerous, each carrying the implicit question of direction, and Mike watched closely, not with suspicion but with awareness, because Part 11 was shaping itself around the theme of accumulation, the way small choices layered over time could either stabilize or destabilize everything they had worked to protect, and the buyer's extended partnership proposal loomed quietly in the background, not urgent but persistent, a presence felt even when unspoken, and Mike insisted they not rush it, framing winter as a time for internal calibration rather than external expansion, and Avery agreed publicly, though Mike sensed the effort it took, because restraint did not come naturally to someone wired for motion, and the tension surfaced again one afternoon when a promising project opportunity arose, a collection of mid-century vehicles offered at a favorable price, the kind of find that could energize the shop and generate buzz, and Avery championed the idea, outlining the strategic upside, while Mike hesitated, concerned about capacity and dilution, and the discussion unfolded with a familiarity that would have felt exhausting months earlier but now felt almost reassuring, because they had learned how to argue without injuring, and they mapped the opportunity against their evolving principles, asking not just whether they could do it but whether they should, and the answer was not immediate, and that delay itself was progress, and eventually they agreed to take on only a portion of the collection, a curated selection rather than the whole, a compromise that balanced ambition with care, and the decision set a precedent that the crew noticed, because it signaled a new maturity in leadership, one that valued sustainability over spectacle, and yet even as internal alignment strengthened, external narratives continued to shift, with media coverage framing Rust Valley as a success story tempered by caution, a shop that resisted being swallowed by its own hype, and while Mike appreciated the nuance, he also recognized the danger of being defined by resistance, because identity built on what you refuse could become as limiting as identity built on unchecked growth, and he shared this concern with Avery during a long drive to inspect one of the new vehicles, the road quiet, snow lining the edges, and Avery listened, then admitted that he too felt caught between roles, no longer the agitator pushing against stagnation but not fully comfortable as a steward of restraint, and the admission opened a deeper conversation about legacy, about what each of them wanted Rust Valley to represent long after they were gone, and Mike spoke of craft, of honesty in work, of places that felt human rather than optimized, while Avery spoke of access, of relevance, of making sure Rust Valley did not become a shrine frozen in time, and the conversation did not resolve these differences, but it reframed them as complementary rather than contradictory, and that reframing mattered, because it allowed both men to see themselves not as obstacles to each other but as counterweights, and winter deepened, bringing longer nights and more time indoors, and with that time came reflection, and Mike found himself reviewing old footage, early seasons, moments of chaos and improvisation that now felt almost mythic, and he wondered whether the audience that had grown alongside Rust Valley could accept this quieter evolution, this emphasis on process over drama, and Avery, for his part, monitored engagement metrics, noticing subtle shifts, smaller spikes but steadier baselines. And he shared these observations with Mike, not as pressure but as information, and Mike appreciated the transparency, because it transformed data from a weapon into a tool, and the extended partnership proposal finally demanded attention when the buyer requested a formal response timeline, and Mike and Avery convened a series of deliberate discussions, involving key crew members, because inclusion was another lesson they had learned, that decisions imposed from above carried hidden costs, and the conversations were candid, revealing a range of perspectives, some eager for security and growth, others wary of losing autonomy, and might listen carefully, weighing these voices against his own instincts, and Avery facilitated, ensuring that optimism did not drown out caution, and the process itself became a kind of rehearsal for the future, demonstrating how Rust Valley might navigate complexity without fracturing, and when Mike and Avery finally sat down alone to draft their response, the tone was neither defensive nor eager but measured, proposing a phased collaboration with clear review points and exit options, and the buyer responded positively, impressed perhaps by the discipline, and the agreement, still tentative, promised stability without surrender, and as winter approached its deepest point, a storm hit hard one night, snow piling high, power flickering, the shop illuminated by emergency lights, and Mike and Avery found themselves working together through the night to secure equipment and vehicles, the crisis stripping away abstraction and reminding them of the physical reality beneath all the strategy, and in the quiet hours, hands cold, breath fogging, Mike realized how much he trusted Avery now, not blindly but practically, and Avery, seeing Mike's calm under pressure, felt his respect deepen, because trust forged in difficulty was different from trust negotiated in meetings, and by morning the storm passed, leaving the yacht transformed, silent and white, and the crisis passed without damage, and the shared experience lingered, reinforcing their bond in a way no agreement could, and as winter slowly began to loosen its grip, subtle signs of change appeared, days lengthening, light shifting, and Mike sensed that Part 11 was about endurance, about testing whether the systems and understandings they had built could withstand not just pressure but monotony, because endurance required a different kind of strength, and Avery seemed to sense it too, channeling his energy into mentoring younger crew members, investing in people rather than deals, and Mike supported this shift, recognizing that legacy was as much about who carried the work forward as what work was done, and when spring planning began tentatively, the question of direction resurfaced, but it felt less threatening now, because uncertainty had become familiar rather than frightening, and Mike reflected that frenemy dynamics, once fueled by fear of loss, had evolved into a productive tension rooted in shared care, and that evolution did not erase risk but made it manageable, and as Part 11 drew to a close in his mind, he understood that the true test still lay ahead, when growth pressures would return with the thaw, and the choices they made then would determine whether this fragile equilibrium could hold, and standing in the quiet shop one evening, snow melting slowly outside, Mike felt neither triumph nor dread but readiness, a grounded confidence that whatever came next, they would meet it not as rivals circling each other, but as partners shaped by difference, and that, he believed, was the real restoration, more complex and more valuable than any car they would ever rebuild. Spring returned to Rust Valley the way it always did, not with certainty but with suggestion, patches of earth emerging from retreating snow, water tracing old grooves through the yard as if remembering paths it had carved before, and Mike Hall stood watching it one early morning, feeling the familiar mix of anticipation and restraint that came with beginnings earned rather than assumed, because this spring carried more weight than most, carrying with it the accumulated choices of the past year. The pilot phase that had reshaped relationships, the sail that had proven restraint could coexist with success, the winter that had tested endurance more quietly but no less thoroughly, and Avery Shove joined him, coffee steaming in the cold air, the two of them no longer standing apart in guarded calculation but side by side in a way that felt unforced, earned through friction rather than comfort. And neither spoke at first because the silence itself had become a shared language, and the yacht looked different now, not fuller, not emptier, but intentional, project space deliberately, pathways clearer, evidence of decisions made with foresight rather than impulse, and Mike felt a deep, steady satisfaction in that, because intention was something he had fought for even when he did not yet have words for it, and the extended partnership agreement with the buyer had been finalized weeks earlier, modest in scope, heavy on safeguards, light on spectacle, and its quiet implementation mirrored the broader shift in Russ Valley's identity, less reactive, more deliberate, and Avery, sensing the moment, spoke not about deals or timelines but about people, noting how the crew had grown into the new rhythm, how younger members had begun taking initiative, how mentorship had replaced firefighting as the dominant mode of leadership, and Mike listened, recognizing that this was Avery's evolution as much as his own, because the drive that once manifested as constant acceleration had found a new outlet in cultivation, and that realization softened something in Mike that had long remained tight, and the days that followed unfolded with a measured optimism, new projects chosen carefully, stories emerging organically rather than engineered, and the audience responded in kind, engagement steadier, quieter, less volatile, and while some missed the drama of earlier seasons, others expressed appreciation for the depth, and Mike learned to accept that not every audience was meant to follow every evolution, and Avery learned to value resonance over reach, and together they navigated the delicate balance of honoring the past without being trapped by it, and one afternoon, as they began work on a modest but meaningful build, a car with no inherent rarity but plenty of history, Mike felt the old joy surge again, the simple satisfaction of hands-on work unburdened by performative pressure, and Avery noticed it, stepping back deliberately, allowing space rather than filling it, and that restraint was perhaps the clearest sign of change, and the frenemy dynamic that had once defined their interactions now felt transformed, not eliminated but integrated, a tension that sharpened decisions rather than corroding trust, and Mike reflected that enemies sharpened by opposition while friends softened by familiarity, but frenemies, when handled with care, force clarity, demanding articulation of values and boundaries, and that clarity had been the unexpected gift of conflict, and as spring progressed, opportunities continued to arise, some tempting, some risky, and Mike and Avery evaluated them with a practiced rhythm, disagreement surfacing without escalation, consensus forming without coercion, and the shop operated not as a battleground or a hierarchy but as a system, resilient because it was honest about its limits. And one evening, after a long but satisfying day, Mike and Avery sat again at the edge of the yard, the valley alive with sound, water moving, birds returning, and Avery asked Mike if he ever regretted pushing back so hard during the pilot phase. And Mike answered honestly that he sometimes regretted the pain but never the stance, because without it, Russ Valley might have survived but not endured, and Avery nodded, admitting that without Mike's resistance his own momentum might have hollowed out the very thing he wanted to grow, and the admission did not carry guilt or defensiveness, only recognition, and that recognition felt like closure, not an ending but a settling, and as the light faded and the shop lights came on, illuminating work rather than spectacle, Mike felt a rare sense of alignment between who he was, what he did, and how he did it, and he understood that Frenemy was never a story about conflict resolved but about conflict refined, shaped into a tool rather than a weapon, and Russ Valley itself stood as proof that restoration was not about returning to some imagined original state but about choosing which marks of time to keep and which to mend, and as Mike locked up for the night, hearing Avery laugh with the crew inside, he felt a quiet gratitude for the path they had not chosen as much as the one they had, because avoiding fracture had required courage, patience, and an uncommon willingness to stay present through discomfort, and he knew that future challenges would come, because they always did, but he also knew that whatever form those challenges took, they would meet them not as rivals guarding territory but as partners guarding purpose, and that, he believed, was the truest restoration of all, one that no sale, no deal, no season arc could ever fully capture, but which lived on in the daily work, the shared decisions, and the enduring tension that kept Russ Valley honest, alive, and moving forward.